very humble of you. Okay,
Well.
all right. And what about you, Raven?
I have some trust issues. I do. I must confess to this. So, and I don't know if this is normal, but it's because I had a bad experience. Okay, so I can at least justify it with this. I worry when I am parked, what will happen. So I worry about the car in front. I worry about the car behind. If there's some angles sideways. So yeah, I would say healthily cautious. Some people might think a little obsessive.
Yes. Oh, we're not making any comment on that.
No, but I think you need to get a car with a
Are you
backing
rolling your
camera.
eyes?
We're like, what did he just say? Trust issues with parking?
Clive Matthew Wilson joining us from the Dog and Lemon Car Buyer's Guide. And I know we're not going to have a long conversation, Clive, but good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And this is a topic, isn't it? It's as worn as a set of dodgy tyres. But why are we lamentable drivers? Do you think we are?
Okay, well, leaving aside the tens of thousands of foreigners who are driving on dubious licences in New Zealand, if you think of New Zealand drivers as being, say, a country farmer from the 1970s on his way to town, everything that they do makes perfect sense. They use both sides of the road, they don't indicate, they drift in and out of their lane, they stop to talk to somebody. And that is the basis. I mean, we get really outraged when we're off to the beach and other people have the same idea. Why don't they go away?
That's true.
This is the underlying basis. But I think this is a dangerous distraction because, asking people to drive safely is a bit like asking them to walk down a flight of steps or walk up a flight of steps safely. Who can argue against it? But, ultimately what saves lives is when you've got a non-slip surface on the steps and a handrail. And New Zealand roads are the exact opposite. And I'm as I keep on pointing out, in the 1980s, there was one serious accident per week on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. They tried all the please drive safely and we're a nation of bad drivers and we'll be out in force this Friday night. Didn't make any difference. What did make a difference is a concrete medium barrier so that the stupid actions of a few drivers or the distracted actions or the old person drifting off to sleep didn't result in fatality anymore. The serious accidents stopped overnight and never came back.
And
if you look at the terrible just a second, if you look at two of the worst accidents in the last fortnight, they've been head-on collisions.
Yes, I was about to compliment you and say the world is actually coming around to your point of view on this. But the AA reckons, there is a need for better education and enforcement. As for enforcement, Clive, isn't that why we used to have traffic cops in the old days? Where is the enforcement?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that the three of the highest risk groups, which is the youngest motorists, the oldest motorists, and middle-aged men on motorbikes, are virtually immune to road safety messages. So if you can convince an old person that's just driven through a plate glass window that it's time to give up their licence, good luck, because the evidence suggests the otherwise. It's just a freak occurrence. 15-year-olds inevitably are 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And this is not just my opinion. We're talking all the science here. So it says don't bother telling them that it's not going to work. What you do is design the roading system and the enforcement system so that simple mistakes are discouraged, and when they do occur, they don't result in head-on collisions, people going off the road, because, we can turn this problem around.
I've got to leave you now this time, Clive. I'm terribly sorry, but we're running out of time. Raymond Cann, thank you for your company on the panel.
My pleasure.
And Linda Helen and you too.
Thank you.
And Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone, what an extraordinary afternoon it's been. Really, nothing has happened. It is 1 minute to 5. We were told yesterday by Winston Peters that whatever was going to happen would happen this afternoon, and it hasn't yet. So, Checkpoint, of course, is on standby to go live to Wellington the moment there is any sign of an announcement. Our gallery team is standing by, our camera people and sound people are standing by, but if that doesn't happen, we have a full program anyway. We're at the appeal court for the Lundy appeal, we're in Myanmar, we're looking at climate change and its impact on our country, and the Northland Regional Council and what it says are strong lines of inquiry into that fuel pipe damage.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. Everyone at Parliament is on standby for an announcement on the new government, which the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has said will happen this afternoon. Earlier this morning, Labour and National both held caucus meetings to brief their MPs on the deals that had been presented to New Zealand First. The New Zealand First caucus has also been meeting for most of the day to consider the two proposals. Just after lunchtime, Mr Peters told reporters his party's focus was very much on making the right decision.
I've got to tell my colleagues and also to remind myself that the decision is everything and other matters are extraneous and they'll sort themselves out once we've made a decision.
So how difficult is it? You say you haven't actually made a decision yet. How difficult is this?
It's seriously difficult because, you know, there are pros and cons for every part of this decision we've got to make. And we've got one more chance to evaluate what it means both ways.
Winston Peters speaking to reporters earlier this afternoon. The Crown says the presence of Christine Lundy's brain tissue on her husband's shirt was an incontrovertible piece of evidence. Lundy, who has twice been found guilty of murdering his wife and daughter, has gone to the Court of Appeal this week in an effort to have his 2015 convictions overturned. The bodies of 38-year-old Christine Lundy and 7-year-old Amber were found by Mrs Lundy's brother in their Palmerston North home on August the 30th, 2000. Both had been bludgeoned to death. The Crown lawyer, Philip Morgan QC, said today Lundy's team suggested the brain tissue must have got on the shirt through contamination during the police investigation, but that could not be true.
The opportunity from police officers or members of the public who have got central nervous system tissue on their clothing while visiting the scene and to have got it on the inside of the appellant's shirt, which was found inside out in his suit bag in the back of his car, was nil.
Philip Morgan QC. A major new report on climate change has been cited as proof New Zealand needs to do more. The Environment Ministry and Stats NZ says greenhouse gas emissions here have risen by almost a quarter in the past 25 years. While agriculture makes up nearly half the emissions, the impact of road transport has increased nearly 80% since 1990. The report highlights the effects already being felt, including a 1 degree average temperature increase in the last century and a quarter of the country's glacial ice melting. Gary Taylor from the Environmental Defence Society says the report proves more needs to be done to control emissions.
We're tracking in the wrong direction at the moment. Emissions are continuing to climb, and if we're going to meet our Paris target by 2030, we're going to have to do a lot more than we're doing now.
Gary Taylor is calling for an independent climate commission. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been talking up a new strategic alliance with Australia, Japan and India that he says will promote a free and open Indo-Pacific. He says the region is facing threats from cyber attacks, North Korea and China's provocative and undermining actions. Mr Tillerson says Australia has always been a strong and important strategic partner to the US in the past, and he says he regards India as one of the anchors of a free and open Indo-Pacific region.
President Trump and Prime Minister Modi are committed, more than any other leaders before them, to building an ambitious partnership that benefits not only our two great democracies, but other sovereign nations working toward greater peace and stability. Prime Minister Modi's visit in June highlighted the many areas of cooperation that are already underway in this new area of our strategic relationship.
US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. A child patient has spent the night in the ceiling of Auckland's Starship Hospital, but officials say the child wasn't stuck and was monitored to ensure their safety. The child climbed into the space overnight, but it wasn't until this morning that emergency services were called to help them down. Sally Murphy reports.
Firefighters were called to the hospital about 8 o'clock this morning. A spokesman said the child had been in the ceiling for some time. The Auckland District Health Board said it had no comment this morning and also told Fire and Emergency to stop providing further updates to the media. This afternoon, a DHB spokesperson said the young patient was not stuck or trapped and was monitored throughout the night. The spokesperson says the child's parents were consulted and kept updated throughout. until the child came down willingly from the ceiling space. WorkSafe says it's not been notified of the incident. In Auckland, Sally Murphy.
It's 5:05. The Kiwis have been forced to make a last-minute change to their Rugby League World Cup coaching team little over a week out from their opening game. Existing assistant Garth Brennan is leaving to take up the head coach role for the Gold Coast Titans. He's been replaced by Australian Ben Gardner. Meanwhile, former Kiwi great Kevin Tamati says while he was annoyed by the last-minute defection of Jason Tomalolo and others to Tonga, the Kiwis must put the issue behind them.
It is what it is, and his choice or their choice has given the opportunity to others. Now it's up to those others to prove that they deserve that opportunity.
Kevin Tamati. And the Kiwis' opening World Cup game is in Auckland next Saturday against Samoa. Wallabies coach Michael CHEC has made just one change to his starting side to play the All Blacks in the third and final Bledisloe Cup test in Brisbane on Saturday. 77 veteran lock Rob Simmons has been promoted from the bench to replace the young Isaac Rodder, who's been ruled out with a shoulder injury. The Breakers are hoping to capitalise on an injury blow for the Sydney Kings ahead of their round 3 ABL matchup in Auckland tonight. Star Sydney guard Kevin Lish, who scored 17 points in their loss to the Breakers last Friday, is out with a torn calf muscle. And Wellington Phoenix skipper and All Whites defender Andrew Durante has been ruled out of the A-League for the 8 to 12 weeks with a groin strain. The injury means he will also miss next month's World Cup playoff against Peru at Westpac Stadium. And that's the news.
A new sex scandal for the Catholic Church.
This secrecy, more than often, comes from family or relatives or friends or the community around you, not the Pope, the Vatican, the Bishop.
A drug problem for the military.
It's an extreme problem, and it's not just with the military, it's also with any public official who has sensitive information. It makes them very vulnerable.
And an illegal frog trade in Turkey.
They were apparently planning to sell them in the south of the country, where they were expected to go on to diners in places like France and Belgium.
Sharing spilled secrets with you every morning. Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what we know so far about our new government. And after 10, the highly acclaimed Catalan conductor, violin player and composer Jordi Savall, who's made it his mission to unearth and revive early musical works. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Taupō, Taihape and from Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mainly fine, areas of low cloud or fog tomorrow morning. Isolated showers possible north of Waikato and about Bay of Plenty from tomorrow afternoon. Taupō, Taihape and Gisborne to Wairarapa. A few light showers north of Wairoa and showers developing elsewhere this afternoon. Clearing from Wairarapa overnight and elsewhere during tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough to Southland, mainly fine. Low cloud or fog about the coastal Canterbury and Otago overnight. Spots of rain over Southland tomorrow evening. And for the remainder of the South Island, fine with a few cloudy periods. There will be rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow night though. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it is 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Kia ora, good evening everyone. Is it evening? Because if it is, the afternoon has come and gone. An afternoon about which Winston Peters said yesterday New Zealand First will be in a position tomorrow afternoon to make an announcement on the result of negotiations following the 2017 general election. Now that was his deadline, as last Thursday was also his deadline, but the formation of a government is being negotiated, and clearly it's better for everyone if the outcome is something the parties can actually make work. As he said early this afternoon, it's been seriously a difficult decision to make. Nothing from him since then. Let's hear what he said just after 1 p.m.
Are you planning to inform either party ahead of that media conference?
Well, again, I have not made a decision on that either.
And just to be clear,
Sorry, what did you say?
I was just going to ask the same question. Will you give them the courtesy of the decision before you make it public?
I'll try to tell my colleagues and also to remind myself that the decision is everything. and other matters are extraneous, and they'll sort themselves out once we've made a decision.
So how difficult is it? You say you haven't actually made a decision yet. How difficult is this?
It's seriously difficult because, you know, there are pros and cons for every part of this decision we've got to make. And we've got one more chance to evaluate what it means both ways.
Is it because there are two good deals on the table? Is it a hard choice to make because you've been offered a lot?
Depends what your perspective is. Let's be honest. No negotiation ends up perfectly the way you'd like it. Because if it was the way you liked it, you'd never be in a negotiation in the first place.
How would you characterise?
One more meeting, do you? So you go back, have some lunch, and then you go back and have one more go to try to get this decision.
Well, actually, I'm going to have some breakfast. So we'll go back, and we've got a few hours to go. But we hope to complete it.
How would you characterise the where the deals are at the moment in terms of how close they are to finality?
We've come to it with a seriously open mind. We're going to make that decision. I can't characterise what my colleagues think about it, because in the end they're all going to matter in what they say and how we report that to the board for confirmation that they have been consulted. But it was never a case of people. There were 12 people on the board, apart from Ron, Mark and myself, making the decision. It is a party decision with the caucus matters most.
But in terms of the deals that you have before you from Labour and National, are they substantially final? Would you expect?
Yeah, they're seriously substantially final, yes.
Is there any chance that you might not be able to come to a decision today?
I hope not. We've set our minds to make a decision. The reason why I don't rule out things is that you never know what might blow in the next couple of hours. That's the nature and chapter of politics. It always has been. Things change by the hour.
Are you still focused on the policies, not positions? Are you confident that your focus?
Policy is everything. It always has been.
And how's the mood with the rest of New Zealand First up in the room today?
Sorry?
How's the mood with the rest of your party in the room today? Are they feeling positive about the decision as well?
Well, look, when you're going into discussions with grave uncertainties that are both personal and as a group of people, very, very anxious time.
Winston Peters speaking about 4 hours ago. Nothing from him since. Let's go now live to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who is beaming in from Parliament. Hi, Jane. What can you tell us?
What I can tell you is that everyone here at Parliament is on high alert, John. So we had the statement yesterday from Winston Peters saying that the announcement would be made here this afternoon. Quite a bit of debate about what this afternoon actually means, I must say. We're at 5 o'clock now, so still probably an hour to go. But look, it could actually go into the night. We don't have any time yet, and we are playing the waiting game. There have been quite a few comings and goings around Parliament. The New Zealand First caucus met today and this morning, during which we talked to Winston Peters, as you've just played, and also his staffers were seen going over to the Beehive Theaterette and setting things up and making sure that everything was in place there. That has been booked out for the day, so that is where we expect it to happen once it does happen. Now, there's also been a very interesting report from the MBR saying that the National Party has pushed back that New Zealand First are asking for 4 cabinet positions and 1 outside, that the National Party is not willing to go that far, and that is one of the dynamics that is happening here today.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we've listened to Winston Peters say that there have been substantive agreements over policy, concessions, what New Zealand First will get, what it can work with. He's been saying for a couple of days now that those deals are basically done. So it does lead you to the conclusion, as we all read the tea leaves while we wait, that the sticking points now are about who will be in Cabinet and how many of them there will be.
And that was always going to be the point of the negotiations. Who was going to offer the better deal, not just policy, but in terms of the positions at the table or those ministerial positions. And as we've talked about today on RNZ, there was always a feeling, and we had the message from National and Labour, that those deals had not been concluded in terms of no final signed deal had been on the table for either of them. So both parties were expecting that negotiations would go on through today day, through the morning, and now it looks like through the afternoon. So things playing out how we expected, but we really just don't know exactly where those negotiations are at, and even whether Mr Peters has finally made a decision or whether there is still back and forth between the parties. Now, another report from News Hub is that Mr Peters was seen twice over in the Labour Parliament buildings. Now, all of these reports we cannot confirm, but this is all of the stories and the speculation that is now starting to come out as that deadline draws closer to that announcement.
Joan, we just called James Shaw, the leader of the Green Party, to talk to him about what their expectations would be around seats in Cabinet and how they would feel if they were excluded from Cabinet whilst New Zealand First was inside. And this is all hypothetical stuff. And he said he was unable to talk to us. Now, there are reports that the Greens are, in fact, holding a meeting tonight that they would only need to hold if they need to decide that they agree with what's being offered. In other words, the suggestion, the inference, and once again this is tea leaf reading, is that the Greens are responding to some information. Have you heard anything at all about this?
Look, from what we've been able to ascertain, the Greens have their special convened meeting. That's their 150 national delegates. They have had a standing booking at 7 o'clock every night. Yep. And what we understand is that has not been cancelled. So whether that actually goes on to be a meeting to consider some kind of deal is still a possibility. But we've been told that the talk about that meeting is the standing schedule. Also, if it does go ahead, that meeting could go quite late. It could be quite a long meeting. But again, as we've discussed before, even if the Greens do go to ratify and even if Labour's Executive Council goes to ratify, that does not necessarily mean that they have been given the nod. There is still a scenario under which the ratification process could occur without either party actually knowing which way Mr Peters will go. Now, I think things have moved on a little bit from that in terms of the National Party process. So basically, they briefed their board and they briefed their caucus today on what Mr English, the leader, Bill English, said were the broad parameters of their deal. And we asked him if there were further concessions given to New Zealand First through the day. That caucus meeting finished at midday. Would he have to go back to the caucus and back to the board? And he said no. There wouldn't be anything substantial on top of what he took to the caucus and board. So I think we can take from that that the National Party ratification process as it is complete. That has been taken to the board and the caucus. We hadn't been able to talk to Mr English afterwards, but we, I suppose, take it that either it's gone through, but we don't know whether that was actually signed off by the board or caucus, or whether negotiations have gone so far past the agreement that they saw that still is unresolved.
Gosh, it's a big thing. And, Jane, lest we forget, a government is being decided here, and there is a degree of frustration now entering into some of the commentary around this. But with people like Paul East and Peter Dunn predicting that whatever deal is done is destined to fail and only create a one-term government, the onus is on Winston Peters to get this spectacularly right? And so it is better for him to do what is required than rush it because people are getting frustrated.
Absolutely, and Jacinda Ardern actually referred to that earlier in the week when there was some bubbling kind of tension and criticisms of the time that it was taken. She said if it takes time to get it right, then we need the time, because it's better to hammer it out now, and that's not just policy, but that's relationships, it's how it's going to work, it's getting everything out of the way now before that. You know, once Mr Peters and the parties come out and make a public announcement, everything is out in the open, the deal, the policies. So if there are any niggles, they have to get it sorted now. I suppose what has really, of course, built the momentum today is that we had a statement in black and white in writing from Mr Peters yesterday saying there will be an announcement this afternoon. Now, as you heard in that video there, he was asked, is there any possibility that it could be deferred? Now, I certainly didn't get the sense that that was where things were going, but he said, we are dealing with other parties here, and he said, this is politics. Anything can blow up in a matter of hours. Things can change very, very quickly. So he was leaving open the possibility it may not happen today, but I certainly got the feeling from him that that was absolutely what they were still driving towards.
Jane Patterson, our political editor, thank you so much, Jane. You have spent so much time over the past few days keeping us informed when there has actually, in substantive terms, been very little to work with, and we really appreciate your efforts. Now, I need to tell you all that we are on standby like everyone else, waiting for the announcement, and the moment there is any sign of it, we will, of course, go live to Wellington for it. We're joined on the phone now by Green Party leader, James Shaw. James, are you there?
I am. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, good. And bewildered and trying to read the tea leaves, and basically there's a tea bag in my cup. How are you? Have you a clue what's going on?
Well, we're in a holding pattern, John, as we have been for a few days now. You know, we've had a series of evenings made available for us to make the conference call with our delegates. I think that's been fairly widely advertised.
Yeah. Is that taking place tonight? Is that conference call still taking place?
That's the current plan, yeah.
Okay, and one would, and once again, you know, this is just speculation, so please disabuse me of any conclusions I'm drawing that aren't simply fact. You would only have that discussion if you have something to discuss, right, in terms of a substantive kind of proposal, an agreement to respond to.
Yeah, so look, if it doesn't happen tonight, then it doesn't happen tonight,
Right,
but that's
okay.
been our position all along. So we're just holding, for that possibility.
Can I ask you about seats in Cabinet? Would you want a Cabinet seat, not outside but inside Cabinet?
John, I'm sorry, you can ask all you like, but I really feel for the media who are really stuck with this, but, I can't talk about the content of the negotiations or the agreements that are emerging.
No, absolutely, and I think many people will feel that's entirely appropriate. A government is being formed here. There is speculation coming out of the NBR, Rob Hosking, suggesting that New Zealand First is striking a really high demand in terms of the number of inside cabinet seats they want. Would there be a sense of grievance from the Green Party, hypothetically, if New Zealand First were inside cabinet and the Greens were outside?
Oh, no, I can't really comment on the agreements between other political parties, but we're kind of ready to go with ours if the need arises.
It's a funny old time, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's a funny old time, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I've said this a number of times over the course of the last week. If you look at other governments in, say, Northern Europe, who've got longer histories of multi-party
weeks
democracy
and months.
than we do, then it's actually quite normal. But in New Zealand's history, it's not. We're fairly new to this, and so, I think it is evolving. But I'm, to be honest with you, pretty relaxed about the time frame.
What do you think, in terms of the things you can most cohesively and logically work with New Zealand First and Labour on, what are the key areas? In other words, where is the natural fit?
Well, on election night, once the results were out, I got up and I made a speech saying that I felt that a majority of New Zealanders had voted for change and not for the status quo, and that there were areas of commonality between New Zealand First and the Greens and Labour, and that in a multi-party democracy in a multi-party government, that the obligation is on parties to look for the areas that you've got in common rather than to look for the areas where you're further apart. And so what I would say is that any government has to represent those areas of commonality. And I felt that there were sufficient ones there to make it work.
And what are the striking areas of commonality for you? What are the ones that really now spring to mind?
Well, on election night, I made a couple of comments about the fact that all three of our parties have committed to, passing the Zero Carbon Act on climate change and setting up an independent climate commission. All three of our parties have been sceptical about the investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms that are contained in trade agreements like the TPPA, and we're concerned about that. And all three of our parties have got a real commitment to the regions and into kind of local economic development.
Thanks, James. We really appreciate it. When did you last talk to Winston Peters?
Not for a while.
No, you and me both. James Shaw, leader of the Green Party, thank you. We really appreciate you joining us in those circumstances. So, ladies and gentlemen, we wait and we wait. And in the meantime, let's go to some other news with the time at 24 and a half past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The Crown says the presence of Christine Lundy's brain tissue on her husband's shirt was an incontrovertible piece of evidence, which was even accepted by his defence team. Lundy, who has twice been found guilty of murdering his wife and daughter, has gone to the Court of Appeal this week in an effort to have his 2015 convictions, that was the second time, overturned. The bodies of 38-year-old Christine Lundy and 7-year-old Amber were found by Mrs Lundy's brother in Palmerston North, their home, the 30th of August 2000. Both had been bludgeoned to death. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May has been following the appeal and filed this report.
An important part of the Crown's case at Mark Lundy's retrial was the scientific RNA evidence. RNA is similar to DNA but allows a scientist to pinpoint which part of the body a particular piece of tissue is from. Earlier this week, Mark Lundy's lawyer told the Court of Appeal that allowing that evidence to go before the jury was wrong and left them drowning in a sea of science. However, the Crown lawyer Philip Morgan QC said today that at the retrial, Lundy's team suggested the brain tissue must have got on the shirt through contamination during the police investigation, but he said the investigation wasn't that hopeless.
The opportunity from police officers or members of the public who have got central nervous system tissue on their clothing while visiting the scene and to have got it on the inside of the appellant's shirt, which was found inside out in his suit bag in the back of his car, was nil.
Philip Morgan said expert witnesses told the retrial the brain matter had to have got there when it was fresh because such material dried very quickly, meaning it could not have become smeared on the shirt while it was being tested in the lab. He also rejected a claim that the stains might have included material from food eaten by Mark Lundy.
To be eating a chili beef and cheese pie, to get a piece of cooked beef on your shirt, which has miraculously transformed itself into being fresh, and Christine Lundy's DNA's got on the same spot. Not just once, it happened twice.
At Lundy's first trial, the Crown suggested he drove at breakneck speed from Wellington to Palmerston North, killed his family and drove back to Wellington. However, at the retrial in 2015, it said the deaths had occurred early on the day the bodies were found. Mr Morgan denied a claim by Lundy's team that it was disadvantaged by the change to the estimated time of their deaths, saying the defence had been given plenty of information during 2014, many months before the February 2015 retrial.
They had Dr Sage's evidence which said that Dr Pang got it all wrong, and they had since August the fact that there was no manipulation of the computer. So the point I'm making is that And they'd known we were always going to amend the indictment since October and said there was no objection to that.
Philip Morgan said the defence team was experienced and able. They did not ask for the trial to be called off, and they went to court recognising the Crown had a good case that it was Christine Lundy's brain tissue on the shirt. The Court of Appeal is expected to reserve its decision. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Coming up to 28 minutes past 5. If you're watching, we're just going to show you one of the world's least interesting shots really ever in the history of television. It is the Beehive Theaterette with a man sitting there gazing longingly up towards the stage. Now, the Beehive Theaterette is an interesting place because you get access to the Beehive when you're government, obviously. That is where the people in charge work. And the Beehive Theaterette is set up for the announcement. The cameras, the microphones are there, but the politicians who are going to make the announcement into the cameras and the microphones most assuredly are not. But if you are listening or watching, we will go there live the moment someone stands on the stage and has something to say. Before then, let's go to Northland, where the Regional Council says it has strong lines of inquiry into who damaged the vital fuel pipeline that supplies Auckland Airport. The pipe broke last month, of course, stopping fuel supplies from the Northland refinery. That caused dozens of flights in and out of Auckland to be cancelled, disrupting thousands of travellers. What was behind it all? Well, the investigation is underway, but Sally Murphy looks at where we're at.
Northland Regional Council spokesman Colin Dell says after numerous attempts to contact the Ruakaka landowner whose property the rupture happened on, they have now spoken to his wife. Mr Dell says she is cooperating with the council's investigation.
Our evidence that we've been collecting over the last few weeks indicates that a digger was on site in the area of the damaged pipeline about 3 years ago.
Was it on that property that the pipe burst?
That's correct.
Mr Dell says they're still trying to figure out who the digger driver is.
Our investigation is about the damage to the pipeline which resulted in the discharge of jet fuel. So we're investigating the matter in terms of the potential cause or contribution to that damage which resulted in the discharge. Whether or not the machinery or digger that may have been involved was looking for swamp kauri is not relevant to our investigation.
Legally, the council has until March next year to lay any potential charges relating to the rupture. It says groundwater samples show water supplies have not been contaminated by fuel. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Katrina Batten will be devastated to have missed us, Anna Thomas, because it's 5:30 and we may in fact be on time for the 5:30 headlines. After the 5:30 headlines, Nona Peltier with Business News, and we're also going to look at a new report by the Environment Ministry and Statistics New Zealand about the impacts of climate change on New Zealand. What's going to happen and where is it going to happen? We're standing by to go live to Wellington if anything happens, but at the moment it's not. Here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Thanks, John. Parliament and the country is on standby for an announcement on the new government, which the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has said will happen today. Labour and National both held caucus meetings today to brief their MPs on the deals that have been presented to New Zealand First. This afternoon, Mr Peters said he still had not decided what to do, and the announcement is expected to be made at the Beehive Theatrette. Meanwhile, Greens leader James Shaw has told Checkpoint his party's in a holding pattern tonight. He says he's unable to discuss the negotiations that have been going on to form a new government, but he can say the drawn-out process of forming a government is quite normal in other countries with MMP. The Crown says the presence of Christine Lundy's brain tissue on her husband's shirt was an incontrovertible piece of evidence. Mark Lundy, who has twice been found guilty of murdering his wife and daughter, is back in the Court of Appeal this week in an effort to have his 2015 convictions overturned. Council officers say they know a digger had been working on the property where the main fuel pipeline that feeds Auckland Airport was badly damaged and ruptured. The pipe broke last month, stopping fuel supplies from the Northland refinery and disrupting dozens of flights. And the Northland Regional Council says it is following strong lines of inquiry. Dunedin police expect to refer several teenagers to youth aid after a 15-year-old girl was assaulted on a city street yesterday. The girl was attacked in View Street near Otago Girls High School and resulted in the victim sustaining minor injuries. The police say some other pupils filmed the incident on smartphones. The rights group Amnesty International says it has strong evidence that Myanmar's army has committed crimes against humanity in the northern Rakhine state. In a new report, it details mass killings, rape, torture and forced evictions of Rohingya Muslims in what the army has said is a campaign against militants. And that's the news.
Thank you so much, Anna. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
We're going to talk about what the dollar's been doing as nothing's been happening in Wellington. We'll come back to that, but let's start with restaurant brands. A good first half result. Market reaction less than enthusiastic. Why was that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. They made a very strong gain in their first half net profit, 41% up. That's pretty darn good. But that was partly because they'd acquired some additional KFC restaurants in Australia, as well as the Taco Bell and KFC in Hawaii. Pizza Hut and Taco Bell in Hawaii. And so I guess the market was expecting more, but, you know, sales were up 50%. You would have thought, hey, great result, but the margins were a little less than the market was hoping for.
Right.
So it marked the share price down 2%. Which is, you know, quite remarkable when you think of such a strong result. So it dropped 13 cents to $6.87.
As I recall, there was a lot of publicity around those purchases, right? Those acquisitions in Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
So clearly people had expected revenue, axiomatically revenue was going to increase. They had more.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but they'd expected a better return.
They expected a better return because if the margins are squeezed, you know, well, that means that you're making less from your revenue, your sales, right? Now, it's interesting, one of the things they have done is they've opened up a new kind of KFC format in Fort Street in downtown Auckland, which is just a small sort of restaurant, but doing really well, catering to inner city, you know, people just stopping by and getting their chicken fix in the inner city. So they said that that's going really well.
Right.
And they're looking at replicating that in other central cities. So
right.
we'll see
a
how
process
that goes.
of reinvention.
I guess so.
Shareholders Association aiming to unseat a member of Fletcher Building's board at next week's annual meeting.
Yeah, now I was a member of the risk and assessment committee. Look, the shareholders are really unhappy with the way that Fletcher Building has been run. They don't think there's enough expertise on the board, and they're certainly hoping that Fletcher Building, when they have their annual meeting next week, will look at putting some more expertise around that table. They think that that's been a big problem, and that's one of the reasons why the company did so poorly. Their result for the full year was a real blowout. You know, they still made $90-some million, but they lost a lot of money in that construction division.
That's going to be tense, that meeting, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd expect so, and I'll be there. That's next Wednesday. Well, that's the plan anyway.
Do they still serve catering at the tense meetings, Nona, the sausage rolls and stuff?
Yeah, well, of course, that's part of the whole thing. You see the sausage roll, you get that going, the aroma, people go, okay, question time over, let's go eat.
Right, what happened on the markets? What did the dollar do today?
Oh, okay, well, I have to say, I spent a little bit of extra time trying to keep track of it. It was moving like crazy, so I called up a currency dealer, and every new headline, every little nuance, everything is moving that Kiwi around. It's moved in quite a range today, so it's been holding steady for a long time, but this flurry of activity here leading up to the end of the afternoon, so to speak, has seen the Kiwi move down, so the longer the uncertainty lasts, the weaker the dollar's become. Last I looked, it was around 71 US cents. Now it's been as high as 71.7 earlier today. 70.8 was its lowest. That's a whole 1 cent change on the US dollar. That's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a big range in a day.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Same with against the Australian. 90.25 was the lowest it got to. This was late this afternoon from 91.27. So again, 1 cent Australian. That's quite a range. We'll see what happens, but you know, it does give you an indication of what the market's thinking. Every time there's another delay or somebody's calling a meeting, it's
or another member of the commentariat calls it one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah. Is it left? Or is it right?
Yeah.
We don't know. But I'll tell you what, on the other hand, our top 50 index had another record close again, but this time just up just almost about, well, actually just over 1%, 9 points to 8,124. That's the 12th consecutive rise. And now, interestingly, that we're seeing that kind of really strong market in Asia, also in the U.S., and so I guess we'll just have to watch this space, but we'll see what happens overnight.
We'll watch it with you tomorrow night.
The currency
Thanks,
markets
Nona.
don't close.
Yeah, thank you. Nona Peltier doing business news here in the Auckland studio. It's 23 minutes to 6. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Higher temperatures, melting glaciers and rising seas. A new report by the Environment Ministry and Statistics New Zealand paints a picture of a changing New Zealand climate with some of the highest greenhouse gas emissions in the developed world. Now, obviously, this stuff is significant. Tom Furley has been looking at it for us.
Greenhouse gas emissions here have risen by almost a quarter in the past 25 years. Per capita, New Zealand has the 5th highest level of emissions in the OECD. Almost half come from agriculture, but as one of the report's authors, Liz McPherson, says, emissions from road transport have increased nearly 80% since 1990.
Our fleet tends to be older, and we as New Zealanders tend to run our cars into the ground. So from that perspective, that is contributing to the carbon dioxide emissions. And one of the things to notice about carbon dioxide emissions is that they stay in the atmosphere for thousands and thousands of years.
Last year, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached the highest level in about 800,000 years. As a result, the average annual temperature is up 1 degree since the early 1900s, and the sea surface is up 0.7 degrees. Last year was the country's warmest in a century, and the report warns droughts in prone regions are expected to be worse and more frequent. The report says there are already potentially irreversible effects for New Zealand, including for its glaciers.
Since 1977, we've lost 25%, which, if you're thinking about this, we've lost enough ice to fill 133,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools each year over the past 40 years.
The report says it's yet to fully understand how climate change is affecting vulnerable native plants and animals, but evidence suggests some species are already being affected. The North Brother Island tuatara are now having more male offspring as a result of warmer nests. The head of the Environmental Defence Society, Gary Taylor, says it highlights the need for more action in addressing emissions.
We're tracking in the wrong direction at the moment. Emissions are continuing to climb. They're climbing in agriculture. They're climbing very dramatically in road transport, which is a bit of a surprise. And if we're going to meet our Paris target by 2030, we're going to have to do a lot more than we're doing now.
Mr Taylor is calling for an independent climate commission. The Ministry's Secretary for the Environment, Vicky Robertson, says the report will be used to shape policy.
We've actually got a group of agencies now working together on that question about how do we transition to a low emissions economy. We've got what we call a hub of public servants who are now thinking really actively about, because it's not just an environmental issue, it's the economic opportunity that might come from this, but also it's a social issue and cultural issue for New Zealand as well.
She says New Zealanders can do their part by planting trees and biking to work. The report also looked into sunlight and says the hole in the ozone is still shrinking. An emeritus researcher at NIWA, Richard McKenzie, says this follows a big international agreement in the 80s, which saw many ditch ozone-depleting substances.
It shows that when you have these global issues, if you get international agreements and adherence to those, even though they're big, huge issues caused by mankind, you can actually make an effect and get the problem to reverse. And so the take I take from this is that there is hope that international agreements on controlling greenhouse gases could follow a similar path.
The report warns New Zealand's climate will continue to warm in the short term, but impacts for the next generations will depend on how much action the world takes now. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
A slight sense of some stirrings in Wellington. We will go live to the Beehive if anything does indeed happen. Being embroiled in controversy with the family of a fallen soldier is not a place an American president wants to be, but it's exactly where Donald Trump has found himself. Now, the family of Sergeant David Johnson and a Democratic congresswoman have accused Mr. Trump of being insensitive when he called Mr. Johnson's widow and said, "I guess he knew what he was signing up for, but I guess it hurts anyway." Mr. Trump says those claims are a complete fabrication, and he insists he has proof that he didn't say it. He hasn't provided that proof yet. This report from CNN.
President Trump embroiled in a firestorm over his condolence call to the grieving widow of an American soldier killed in Niger.
Didn't say what that congresswoman said. Didn't say it at all.
Today at the White House, the president spoke about his call Tuesday to Maisha Johnson. She's the pregnant wife of Sergeant David Johnson, who mourned the loss when his flag-draped casket arrived home in Florida. The soldier's mother and Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who both listened to the call, told CNN the president disrespected Sergeant Johnson by saying he knew what he signed up for. The president denied using those words, saying on Twitter that Wilson totally fabricated what I said to the wife of a soldier who died in action, and I have proof. Sad. He did not provide proof as the controversy escalated between the commander-in-chief and the family of a fallen soldier.
I did not say what she said. I had a very nice conversation with the woman, with the wife, who sounded like a lovely woman, did not say what the congresswoman said, and most people aren't too surprised to hear that.
What's the proof, Mr. President?
Let her make her statement again, and then you'll find out.
Wilson, a Florida Democrat, stood by her account. The soldier's mother also telling CNN the congresswoman's recollection was very accurate. When asked if she was shocked by the president's words, the congresswoman said this.
Stunned, still stunned. So insensitive. So insensitive. Mr. Trump is crazy.
The extraordinary feud did little to shed light on what actually led to the ambush that killed Johnson and 3 other American soldiers in West Africa. For the president, it's the deadliest combat incident involving U.S. troops since taking office. Asked earlier why he didn't address the attack for nearly 2 weeks, the president falsely claimed his predecessors did not contact the families of fallen troops.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls.
It was another mark against his credibility as he tries to breathe new life into his stalled legislative agenda.
That report from CNN. It's 16 minutes to 6. It does seem as if an announcement from Winston Peters is not too far away. Now, is it the announcement? We don't know, but it does sound like he is preparing to make a formal announcement in the not too distant future. Obviously, we will have it live. But before all of that, because it's not happening yet, Dunedin Police and at least 2 local high schools are investigating after a group of schoolgirls attacked a 15-year-old girl while other teens, some of them filming, watched on. The police were called to the assault in View Street in central Dunedin at about 3:45 yesterday afternoon. But while this was an isolated event, the issue facing teenagers is not. Timothy Brown reports.
This incident again brings the dark side of social media and technology use among teens to a head. 2 Dunedin high schools have confirmed they're investigating the matter, but the problem is not isolated to their pupils. Last year, a video of a Waitangi boys high school pupil headbutting and kicking another teenager circulated social media, and a 13-year-old girl was knocked unconscious in a central Dunedin restaurant after being attacked from behind by other teens. The problem of bullying in schools is not new, but NetSafe Chief Executive Martin Cocker says social media has provided a frightening new forum for aggressors throughout the country.
Technology has given people who wish to bully someone else a new set of options, and people take those options up. So absolutely, this is a different problem than society was facing 10 years ago when this technology wasn't in people's hands.
He says the growth of smartphone use increased the problem and steps need to be taken to fight it.
There's no single answer, but there are a series of answers in terms of combating online abuse and harassment. New Zealand has enacted the Harmful Digital Communications Act. It makes the harassment and abuse of people, recording of these kinds of things and sharing of them an offence. There's a need for industry to support it, and of course there's a general need to educate people about how it is unacceptable and potentially an offence.
But is it working for teenagers? The mother of one girl who suffered a prolonged campaign of online harassment which culminated in 2 serious assaults says the problem is far-reaching and has long-lasting consequences. She says her daughter is yet to recover from the vitriol and harassment she was dealt by her peers.
It all starts with online. It all starts with online. She's never really come 100% right from all the harassment she got over quite a long period of time.
But how can teenagers carry out protracted campaigns without anyone knowing?
I think a huge part of it is that parents just aren't fully aware of what their kids are actually doing online and the amount of bullying and harassment that is online that causes a lot of these incidents.
She says the worst thing is many of the victims suffer in silence, while their tormentors are not caught. The police say they are taking the latest incidents seriously and expect several teenagers will be dealt with by Youth Aid. The attackers came from several local schools, and Constable Paul Kennedy says police are working with the pupils' parents and schools on resolving the matter. The principals of Otago Girls High School and St Hilda's Collegiate School say they are aware of the matter and concerned by the allegations. They did not wish to comment further until they have investigated what took place. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
People arriving in the Beehive Theaterette, mic checks being done. We are standing by to go there when somebody who has something to actually say also arrives there. Australian pharmacists are warning about the potentially lethal consequences of making common codeine-based medicines like Panadine and Nurofen Plus prescription only. Now, they'll be banned from over-the-counter sales there from February, but as New Zealand's MedSafe is looking at whether to follow suit here, Australian pharmacists want their government to soften its stance. They say making all codeine prescription only will clog up already stretched medical centres and leave others suffering in silence. The ABC's David Cody takes a look at the codeine debate across the Tasman.
Pharmacist Carolyn Diamantis is behind the counter, guiding customers on how to manage their pain.
If you'd like, you can just short-term try the Panadine with the paracetamol, which is in there, plus a little bit of codeine for pain relief.
She's in her white coat and reaching for a box on a shelf.
Yeah, there's only 4 days' supply. It's a small box, but I want to trial how well you go with it.
Carolyn Diamantis has been a pharmacist for 30 years. She's also the Vice President of the Pharmacy Guild of New South Wales, and she's adamant that codeine can be effective for acute pain.
I've got a busy pharmacy, so I would have quite a strong sort of push for those medications. So we do a lot of filtering and screening here. We also use a program which is called Meds Assist, which is an Australia-wide recording platform. Now that's extremely useful because that does prevent people from then shopping to different pharmacies and collecting a big stash of codeine-containing analgesics.
But the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the government's regulatory body, deems the risks of using the drug without oversight from a doctor as too high. It's concerned about opioid tolerance and dependence and the risk of addiction and death. It's restricting the availability of the drug, which is derived from opium poppies. It's a change welcomed by Dr. Chris Hayes, the Dean of the Faculty of Pain Medicine at the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists.
Codeine-related deaths in Australia doubled between 2000 and 2009, so we're concerned about harm to the community. We're also concerned that the front desk in a pharmacy is not a good place to have difficult conversations with people about potential codeine addiction.
The Pharmacy Guild of Australia's Executive Director, David Quilty, rejects any suggestion the lobbying effort is aimed at protecting pharmacy revenue.
We're not seeking to overturn it, but it does come with real issues for patients. In particular, the fact that there's no real-time monitoring for prescriptions, whereas there is in pharmacy, and secondly, there's going to be a major influx of patients having to go to doctors to get a script for these medicines and other medicines, and how an overstretched system's going to be able to deal with it.
How intensive has the Pharmacy Guild's lobbying been? You've employed a former Liberal Minister, Santo Santoro, to do the work. How much are you paying him?
Oh, Santo's been assisting us at the state and territory level. The arrangements between us and him are commercially in confidence, but we've been working behind the scenes, encouraging governments to understand the impact of this decision. We've made very clear we're not trying to overturn it, but does have flow-on impacts in terms of patients.
Now, 5 medical and consumer groups have published an open letter to state and territory health ministers warning any change will put lives at risk. In it, groups including the Rural Doctors Association, the College of General Practitioners and the Consumers Health Forum say the Guild's model carries a serious risk of increased harms and potentially preventable deaths.
That is David Cody from the ABC with that report. Fascinating issue, this. It's coming up to 8 minutes to 6. Still looking at pictures coming in from Wellington. In fact, Kelvin, our director, has just put up, if you're listening, the shot of the Beehive Theatre. Lots of mics and cameras going up, and lots of people suggesting Winston Peters is not far away from making an announcement of some description. We will go there live if and when the announcement happens. The police investigation into the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia promises to be one of the most complex in Malta's history, if only because of the number of enemies the Maltese investigative journalist and blogger had made through her fearless work. Now, she was also a mother of 3. She died on Tuesday when an explosive device was detonated near her car, not far from her home, a secluded home in Malta. The slain journalist, dubbed by Politico as a one-woman WikiLeaks, was a polarising figure in Malta, a thorn in the side of many across the political spectrum. Her son has denounced Malta as a mafia state. This report from the BBC's Daniel Sanford.
At the scene of the murder today, 20 or so officers in white forensic suits were combing the site of the car bomb that killed Malta's best-known investigative journalist. Bomb experts have come from the Netherlands and mobile phone specialists are coming from the FBI. In an interview with the BBC, the Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, has promised that no expense will be spared in funding the investigation.
We will leave no stone unturned. That's why the FBI has been involved. You know, we want them caught. I think besides the family, the person who really wants most this issue to be settled is myself.
The murder has been a political disaster for the Prime Minister, leaving people asking who had the most to gain from her death. Daphne Caruana Galizia was one of his harshest critics. Her oldest friends, like Petra Caruana Dingley, have not accused the Prime Minister. She says she never dwelt on the possible consequences of her reporting.
She was, I think, so determined to say what she wanted to say and not be silenced that she refused to contemplate those consequences, which very sadly now, she's now being killed in the most violent manner.
And 2 days after the murder that shocked Malta, we're no closer to knowing who killed Daphne Caruana Galizia.
Daniel Sanford from the BBC, the reporter there. It's at home again, the final Waitangi Tribunal hearings for Northland's long-running Te Paparahi o Te Raki treaty claims are being held in Waitangi this week. The hearings cover a range of issues from tino rangatiratanga to te reo Māori to socio-economic issues. Our Northland reporter LOIS Williams is there. Hi LOIS, what can you tell us? What's the latest?
Oh, hi there, John. Oh, well, there's been a very long day of hearing lengthy submissions from the two Crown Counsel in response to these are the closing submissions, so this is when I finally get to have a defend the Crown's record regarding treaty breaches. But I suppose the underlying theme of the day has been Winston Peters, of course, and yes. People have been surreptitiously checking and updating their cell phones, everyone from the lawyers to the claimants to even, I think, possibly one or two tribunal members, to see what the latest is. There seems to have been quite a lot of confidence earlier today that he would go with Labour. One of the Labour Party people up here announced very confidently at lunchtime that, look at the colour of my jacket, it was bright red, and he said, we're in for a good day, words to that effect. So, but they've gone a bit quiet, John, because nothing's happened, obviously.
Well, we all have. I mean, there's only so many tea leaves you can read, right, before you feel like a coffee, Lois.
That's right, exactly, or something stronger.
Yeah, exactly, yes. Look, I don't know if you've heard all of this because it's so big. What has been discussed for a very long time now, but I'm really interested in how the Crown has responded to claims, for example, that there has been a neglect of te reo Māori. What's being said in response to that?
Yes, they have made a lot of concessions, John, about a lot of the treaty breaches, about a lot of the grievances, but this was a new one today. They did make a new concession that the Crown has failed to protect te reo in the north and to encourage its use. I mean, in their defence, they did point out that it was quite a complicated business up here because, of course, you had the missionaries teaching only in te reo for years.
That's right.
And as late as the 1930s, most Māori children were still speaking Māori at home, and it was their primary language. But they made the point, and I hadn't realised this, but sort of around about in the 1870s, a number of Māori chiefs were actively lobbying the government for schools to be set up that would teach only English because they were clearly feeling a bit excluded and they wanted to play a greater role in the economy, in the emerging colonial economy and in politics. And they were clearly feeling that they were being shut out by only being able to speak Māori. So that was a request from a number of them for these schools.
Lois, we've got about a minute. So it's your choice. You can either talk for 1 more minute or 3 minutes to take us through to 6 o'clock. And there's lots I'd like to ask you. You reckon you can do 3 more minutes with us?
I can probably do too. We should probably talk about
I want to talk about...
Ask me about the sovereignty claim.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated about the sovereignty claim because this has had... Ngāpuhi, this has been so complex. And Ngāpuhi chiefs didn't cede sovereignty when they signed Te Tiriti, did they?
No, well, this is what the tribunal found, of course, at the end of the stage one.
Absolutely.
That they had not meant to hand over ultimate control to the Crown. And the tribunal at the end of that report invited the Crown to respond and explain itself and say, well, OK, how do you say you came by sovereignty if the chiefs didn't cede it? And how and when did you get it, So they have responded to that in rather a big, fat submission, which I haven't had time to digest. But essentially, it seems to be saying that the Crown seems to be saying that they have achieved sovereignty through proclamation, that the treaty resulted in two forms of authority, the Crown's kawanatanga and the chief's tino rangatiratanga, and that these things overlapped, which has caused difficulties, but that British sovereignty was eventually acquired once it was gazetted in October 1840. You can imagine there's been a great deal of scoffing about that from the audience. Yes, they're going to respond to that.
What are the plans? What are the plans for the final day, Lois? Some partying? What will happen?
Well, at Burrows there'll be a party. I think perhaps a rather restrained party because the tribunal's hosting it, but it's going to be a whakamitanga, a dinner tomorrow night. There'll be speeches of farewell, and there'll be, I think, a few tears and a lot of emotion because we have lost a lot of people along this journey. A lot of elders, a lot of beloved and respected people. But then they are having this dinner in the evening to say their final farewells.
History being made, Lois, and not for the first time, obviously, in your beloved North. Thank you very much, Lois Williams, joining us live. Quite an extraordinary and prolonged and protracted negotiation, and so much has happened there since the treaty was signed and then almost immediately breached in 1840. It's 30 seconds away from 6 o'clock. Kelvin, have we got a shot of the Beehive Theatre yet? You wonderful man. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. If you're watching, if you're listening, you're missing out on a shot of a wooden lectern and 3 flags and a black curtain. It's television gold. But at some stage, we think, in the next wee while, Winston Peters will go and stand behind that lectern and tell us something, we think. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. Anna Thomas is here and she is going to tell us something, we're sure.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Everyone at Parliament remains on standby for an announcement on the new government, which the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has said will happen this evening. Earlier this morning, Labour and National both held caucus meetings to brief their MPs on the deals that had been presented to New Zealand First. The New Zealand First caucus has also been meeting for most of the day to consider the 2 proposals. Meanwhile, the Green Party is planning to convene its 150 national delegates tonight to vote on the deal it has struck with Labour. During the coalition talks, Labour negotiated separate deals with New Zealand and the Greens. Under the party rules, at least 75% of the meeting has to vote in favour of the deal. The Crown has rejected a suggestion that tissue found in stains on Mark Lundy's shirt might have contained animal material from spilt food. Lundy, who has twice been found guilty of murdering his wife and daughter, has gone to the Court of Appeal this week in an effort to have his 2015 convictions overturned. The Crown lawyer Philip Morgan said expert witnesses told the retrial the brain matter had to have got there when it was fresh because such material dried very quickly. He admitted one theory had been that the marks on the shirt might have also contained tissue from meat spilt from a pie, but said Mark Lundy would have to have been very unlucky for that to have happened.
To be eating a chili beef and cheese pie, to get a piece of cooked beef on your shirt, which has miraculously transformed itself into being fresh, and Christine Lundy's DNA's got on the same spot. Not just once, it happened twice.
Philip Morgan QC, the court reserved its decision. The rights group Amnesty International says it has strong evidence that Myanmar's army has committed crimes against humanity in northern Rakhine state. In a new report, it details mass killings, rape, torture and forced evictions of Rohingya Muslims in what the army has said is a campaign against militants. The violence has led to up to 580,000 Rohingya to escape into Bangladesh. Amnesty researcher Matthew Wells interviewed people who have fled and says they all have similar stories.
The stories were highly consistent, highly corroborating in terms of the fact that the Myanmar military had surrounded these villages, had opened fire on men, women and children as they fled, and then had systematically burned down houses, mosques, schools.
Matt Wells says Amnesty is calling on the United Nations Security Council to impose an arms embargo on Myanmar and set targeted sanctions against senior officials. Dunedin police expect to refer several teenagers to youth aid after a 15-year-old girl was attacked in the city yesterday. The assault occurred in View Street near Otago Girls High School and the victim received minor injuries. The police say some other pupils filmed the incident on smartphones. NetSafe Chief Executive Martin Cocker says with increased use of smartphones, it means every event is likely to wind up being filmed.
The facts are that these days pretty much everybody is carrying around a smartphone which enables them to record what's in front of them. And so, you know, almost every significant event that happens, somebody pulls out a phone and films it, and that's certainly the case for fights and assaults.
Martin Cocker says while legislation attempts to tackle the issue, people need to realise such behaviour is unacceptable. A new volunteer initiative to help keep partygoers in Wellington CBD safe is launching next month, just in time for the Christmas party season. The forecourt of the Opera House on Manners Street will be set up as an alcohol-free zone where people can get water, charge their phones and get help arranging a ride home. The program will start on November the 4th and run every Saturday night until April next year. And organiser Paul Retimanu says he hopes the program will add value to Wellington's nightlife.
It hasn't been in Wellington at all, it's new, but we just think with regards to a lot of the stuff that's been going on in the last couple of years around alcohol, where people, you know, there's been issues with the hospitality industry with regards to police trying to get certain things across the line, we think it's a positive step. So it's front-footing things and issues rather than the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
A Safe Zone organiser Paul Retimanu. All trains in and out of Wellington will be delayed for up to 18 minutes because of a points fault just outside the capital. A spokesperson for the company that runs the trains, Transdev, says they found out about the fault at about 5:15. They have no idea what caused it or how long it will take to fix at this stage. Central Otago was scorched with a sizzling 26 degrees Celsius heatwave today, although the Deputy Mayor says this is only the start. Neil Gillespie says almost all of the Central Otago reached 26 degrees, with locals taking to the lakes and waterways to combat the heat. Mr Gillespie says the region typically experiences hot weather as the end of the year approaches, although today's heat was unusually early. It's 6:05. All Whites defender and Wellington Phoenix skipper Andrew Durante has been ruled out of next month's FIFA World Cup playoff tie against Peru with a groin injury. Durante suffered the abductor tear late in the Phoenix A-League's loss to Sydney FC on Sunday and will be sidelined for up to 12 weeks. The veteran defender will miss both the Wellington and Lima legs of the World Cup playoffs. The Breakers are looking to make it 2 from 2 in their Australian Basketball League rematch with the Sydney Kings in Auckland tonight. The Breakers sneaked home 87-85 over Sydney last Friday, with American import DJ Newbill hitting the winning shot in the last second of the game. Newbill says he's thriving on the support he's had since his arrival.
The coaches is giving us the opportunity to come out here and play our game. You know, first day I came in, Coach Paulie said, whatever you do best, that's what I want you to do. So, you know, hearing that from your head coach, I mean, what more do you want as a player?
DJ Newbill. Experienced Wallabies lock Rob Simmons has been promoted from the bench and the only change to the Australian starting side to play the All Blacks in Saturday's final Bledisloe Cup test in Brisbane. The 77-test veteran replaces the young Isaac Rodder, who's been ruled out with a shoulder injury. All Black Sevens and Counties Manukau stalwart Sherwin Stowers is retiring from professional rugby. Stowers debuted for the Sevens team as an 18-year-old in 2004 and has picked up 4 World Series Sevens titles, Commonwealth Games gold and silver medals, and a Sevens World Cup victory during his 13-year career. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a real start with the director and actor Miranda Marasiades talking about the new work she's helping to stage, inspired by Salvador Dali's fascination with lobsters. Well, he would be, wouldn't he? We might also hear from one of the other collaborators, the sax player Lucian Johnson, and Yusuf Islam, formerly known as Cat Stevens, chats about his new album ahead of his tour of Aotearoa on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Pick my daughter up.
OK, looking at the weather forecast now, it's a short forecast until midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Taupo. Taihape and from Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mainly fine, areas of low cloud or fog tomorrow morning. Isolated showers possible north of Waikato and about Bay of Plenty from tomorrow afternoon. Taupo, Taihape and Gisborne to Wairarapa. A few light showers north of Wairoa and showers developing elsewhere this afternoon. Clearing from Wairarapa overnight and elsewhere during tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough to Southland mainly fine. Low cloud or fog about coastal Canterbury and Otago overnight. Spots of rain over Southland tomorrow evening. For the remainder of the South Island, fine and cloudy periods. Rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow night. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Yes, and we've been behaving like schoolboys, and I unreservedly apologise, Anna Thomas, because Matthew Hooton is gloating beside me at the table here in the studio. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We're just going to whack up. Kelvin, can we put up a shot of the Beehive Theaterette? Now, once again, it's the same old lectern and the same young reporter who is trying to get a live shot out of his iPhone. But we understand Winston Peters is about to arrive there and make whatever announcement he is going to make. We will cross there live the moment that happens, but there does seem to now be a sense that it is imminent. To discuss that, and we're going to stay on here until it happens, within reason, of course. I mean, I would say probably March or April, we'd call it quits. To discuss this as we wait, and then as we try and make sense of it afterwards, former Press Secretary, PR man. What are you, Matthew Hooton?
Radio New Zealand political commentator.
You're wearing a red shirt on the phone. So Matthew Hooton is behind me in the studio with a red shirt. Former United Future leader and Cabinet Minister Peter Dunn, who's worked with both National and Labour and Coalition. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am, John. Hello.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And former leader and deputy leader of the Alliance, Sandra Lee, who was a Cabinet Minister in the Labour Alliance Coalition on the line from Whakatane. Kia ora, Sandra, you there?
Kia ora, John. Nui kia koe.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Which way do you think it's going to go, Sandra Lee?
God, when it's Winston, who knows? But I've been of the view that his cultural attachment to the National Party would tend to see him lean towards a national coalition, even though clearly there's far, far greater policy alignment with Labour. Having said that, I think Bill English will be pulling out all the stops to try and achieve a national New Zealand First government. He has always been the bridesmaid in terms of being a genuine New Zealand Prime Minister, and I think it's a ball he wouldn't want to drop. Having said all that, as a lefty and a socialist, I'd be delighted to be wrong in this case.
Peter Dunn, what are you picking?
Well, I don't have a view, actually, John. I think there are strong arguments for going with National, strong arguments against, and equally so on the Labour side. And I think that's probably why it's taking so long for New Zealand First to finalise a position, because I think they're damned whatever they do, frankly.
Yes, and there has been lots of frustration from people saying, why is it taking so long? Well, it's taking so long because it's important, right? Now, far be it from me, a journalist, to defend Winston Peters, because I'm sure if the boot was on the other foot, he wouldn't respond in kind. But actually, it's important to get this as right as you possibly can, because it matters, Peter Dunn.
That's correct. I don't have a problem with the time it's taking. I do have a problem with the way in which it's been played out, where I think both Jacinda Ardern and Bill English have been very weak in terms of their leadership of this process. They've handed all the cards to Peters, and I think they'll both rue the day, whichever one of them it is that ends up holding the poison chalice of Prime Minister. But the fact that it's taken 20-odd days, I don't really have a problem with that.
Matthew Hooton is sitting beside me. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Sandra. So Sandra, fearing National, hoping for Labour. Peter saying he doesn't know. Matthew Hooton, you were making big predictions in the NBR some considerable time ago, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I said back in March that Labour should make Jacinda Ardern leader if they wanted to win this election, and I predicted a Labour New Zealand First government back in August.
And actually that's on the record. I mean, that's in writing from the beginning of August in the NBR, yeah.
And that was on the front page there. And I think the best thing for Winston Peters is to form a government with the Labour Party. He has been part of governments towards the end of their cycle, twice with, of course, Jim Bolger and then with Helen Clark.
Yep.
And they have ended, for different reasons, badly for him. And this at least is an opportunity for him to start something new, for him to be part of something new. And there's a good chance it will fail. The majority here is going to be Golres, Chloe Swarbrick and Eugenie Sage. And on the other hand, there's going to be Shane Jones and Ron Mark. So it's going to be difficult keeping this government together if it is the government we're expecting. But nevertheless, there is at least a chance it will be successful.
At some level, when we opted, our first MMP election was in 1996, which meant we voted for it in 93, right? Mm-hmm. At some level, when we opted for MMP, it wasn't precisely that kind of broad chapel what we were hoping for, that governments would be more inclusive than they were under First Past the Post, more representative of as many New Zealanders as possible.
Sure, I still think we have a fairly immature proportional representation system, as Peter was referring to, really. In most proportional representation systems, the two big parties, Labour and National or their equivalents, will at least keep the possibility open of maybe one day having a grand coalition, and that keeps the small parties a little bit in check. And also, as we're seeing in Germany right now, Angela Merkel's equivalent centre-right National Party, the Christian Democrats, is negotiating with the Green Party there. And that also creates a more dynamic situation. In this case, as Peter was saying, Winston Peters, through very skillful political talents, has got himself where he has huge power.
Yeah.
But fair enough, if National and Labour and the Greens all want to have these policies that they won't talk to one another, then fair enough what Winston Peters has done here, and it looks like he's going to get 4 cabinet posts.
Extraordinary.
With 7% of the vote.
Absolutely extraordinary. Sandra Lee, can I come back to you, because you, the alliance made disparate parties work together, and then it fell apart. How hard will it be for the Greens and New Zealand First to be part of the same government?
I don't think it'll be fatal, and I think it is far more high risk for Winston Peters to go with National. And I say that because Winston is a very traditional conservative. His political hero was Rob Muldoon. He's anti the neoliberal policies of this government, and this government is made up, National, of ardent free marketeers. And in my view, that's going to be a far more volatile mix than any relationship that Winston Peters will have to deal with the Greens, who are very intelligent people, who are strategic enough to want change for the betterment of New Zealand. Can I just pick up on one point too? Let it be remembered that after all the issues in this remarkable election campaign that were discussed, poverty, homelessness and all the rest of it, fabulous. I know we've had a lull and a very boring period, but let it be remembered that all these negotiations ought not to be under MMP about power for power's sake alone. And that's why, to me, the notion of a grand Labour coalition, Labour National coalition, is ludicrous. The whole idea of MMP in its very introduction was in a reaction to a first-past-the-post system that could not rid our country of the ideology of a then Labour government and Rogernomics. So hopefully, once any government is announced, those important issues that were all right up front during this election campaign will be brought back into focus rather than just the issues of Winston and personalities.
Peter Dunn, can I come to you? And I want to pick up on a couple of points Sandra Lee was making, but I also want to ask you about the strength you have when you were being courted by National and Labour, and you worked with both parties. And, in fact, your strength is never greater than in this courtship period. And then, of course, you run the risk of your identity being subsumed, of you simply being lost beneath the business of government. How do you achieve the balancing act? And how do you do what Sandra was talking about, which is put ideals and policies to the forefront rather than personalities and power?
Yeah, and it's been a very difficult balancing act, which I don't think anyone has successfully managed to date. What tends to happen, and I can speak with bitter experience about this really, is that if you're announcing policies that you've worked on and you've achieved and they're part of your program that are positive for the government, it will claim the credit.
Yeah, that's right.
If they are not positive for the government or are seen as things the government's not committed to, you wear it by yourself. So you don't get the praise for the good things you do, you get the blame for the things that go wrong, because it was your votes that let that through. You could have voted against that legislation. You could have stopped them. And that sort of blurs the perception that you're in some sort of a team environment. You've got to play for the team. But it's not the majority party that cops the flak for unpopular decisions. It's the minor parties that cop the flak for letting them do it. And until we can move away from that sort of mentality, I think this whole process is going to have a certain repetitious effect where small parties will come and small parties will go, because they can never break out of the shadow of the big parties. Yeah. And what I think the big parties have got to do, and they've not done to date, is really start to think about how they nurture support parties that are going to endure.
I disagree with that, Peter.
I'd love to work with you after the election, but you go out there and get your numbers and then we'll talk to you. And, it's your fault if they don't get a majority.
The issue, it seems to me, is if small parties are going to be successful in an MMP environment, they must not be parties that are nurtured by either Labour or National. Now, we are moving really towards a four-party system where we have a Labour and National government, Labour and National parties, which are the traditional centrist, leaning one to the right, one to the left parties. We also have a nationalist party, which is traditional in most countries, where there's people who are concerned about globalisation and immigration, and it has about 10% of the vote on a good day. And of course, we have a strong environmental party. And the New Zealand First Party has now lasted for more than a quarter of a century. That's quarter of the time that the Labour Party has existed. The Green Party, of course, has an identity which is separate and distinct from Labour. And, parties like ACT or United Future, or obviously the Maori Party, which has now got too close to National, which were nurtured. National did fundraisers for the Maori Party. This is not the future of MMP with parties like those, with due respect to Peter, who's had a very successful career.
Absolutely, and we're working with both parties. New Zealand First formed in 1993. As Sandra Lee, it is an enduring success story, because whilst they were tossed out in 2008, right? Yes, they were. So they had one term. So since 1993, they've had one term outside Parliament, which is a phenomenal success story, really, because you, Sandra Lee, and you, Peter Dunn, know how hard it is to stay there.
Yes. Winston needs a fair amount of credit for the way that he has ensured that he's kept New Zealand First's head above water throughout all these years. But what he's done is he's ensured that he has a fundamental support base that identify specifically and uniquely with New Zealand First. And the same can be said for the Greens. When political parties appear to have been manipulated by convenience to bolster any political major party in Parliament, then they almost inadvertently write their own death warrant.
Sorry, Sandra, can I, because that's such a good point to go to Peter Dunn on. Peter Dunn, is that what happened to you? Is that what happened to your party?
No, that wasn't the point that I was making. What I was really alluding to was the fact that the situation that we've got into, which people are unhappy with in the wake of this election, where New Zealand First appears to hold all the cards, is because the National Party and the Labour Party, to some extent, were bereft of alternatives. Now, all I'm saying is it's one thing to bemoan the fact that you don't have alternatives. It's another thing to make sure you do have alternatives. I'm not suggesting you create, which was, I think, the Morris Williamson solution of many, many years ago, sort of like cocoon parties within a major party. I'm not saying that at all. But I think you do need to work more strongly with those parties who you have traditionally worked with, to support them, to make sure that you continue to work with them. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where one rogue party, and in the context of not being part of the major blocks, New Zealand First is that, holds from time to time all the cards, and people say this is terrible for MMP. Well, no, it's a consequence, really, of people not understanding MMP.
Peter Dunn, I just want to come in. If you have just joined us, welcome to Checkpoint. So Sandra Lee, Matthew Hooton and Peter Dunn, and we are talking while we wait for, and we've got the shot coming in from the Beehive Theaterette, which we're going to put up on air now. The lectern is set to go. The journalists are gathering. And we are waiting for what we understand is an imminent announcement from Winston Peters and New Zealand First. So that's why we are talking, and we are waiting for that announcement, and we will go to it live the moment it happens. Matthew Hooton, you are expecting he will go with Labour?
Yeah. What has been rumoured, and everything's been rumoured, and for all we know, he's going to turn up and announce that Bill English is going to have a fourth term. But what has been rumoured is that the Greens would have this big conference call of 150 to 170 delegates after an announcement was made that Winston Peters preferred to go with Labour. Now, that Green Party conference call has been scheduled every night for 6 p.m. And at about mid-afternoon each day since last Thursday, an email has gone out to the Green Party delegates saying, sorry, no phone call tonight. Now, what happened today is that the conference call was confirmed. The Green Party delegates were told it's not going to be 6, it's going to be 7, which suggests that an announcement from Winston Peters is expected before 7.
Yes.
And also the Green Party delegates were told, look, put a line through the whole evening. This is going to be a long conference call. This is not a conference call where we just say, look, thanks for everyone's help during the campaign. This is a conference call where they will have to make a decision, and this is what I understand is going to happen, about whether or not to support a Labour New Zealand First coalition government on confidence and supply. Of course, the Greens have no option, whatever is in this deal, quite frankly, but to support Jacinda Ardern and Winston Peters have agreed because, of course, the Green Party membership has completely ruled out ever doing a deal with any other party other than Labour. And so, really, that's how we expect it to pan out, a Labour New Zealand First government with Green support.
Matthew Hooton, thank you. I want to put that point to Sandra Lee. We are just standing by. We think an announcement is not terribly far away. But Sandra Lee, did the Greens do the right thing by saying there are no circumstances in which we would go with National, because in doing so they lost their negotiating power, right?
No, they did the principled thing. The people who vote for the Green Party vote along ideological lines. The name of the party says it all. They are people that are very concerned that we do much more for the environment, New Zealand's biodiversity, climate change, and the policies of the National Party have seen all of the environmental indicators in our country consistently becoming worse and worse. So as a matter of principle, ideologically speaking, they could not ever hope to maintain their membership and their voter base if they were prepared to go into a coalition with National. And therein lies the dilemma. It's not just about power for power's sake. Will the Greens forever linger on the crossbenches? And they may. But it doesn't mean to say that they're not going to make a contribution, and it doesn't mean to say that they won't get outcomes.
Advisory from New Zealand First.
Sorry,
this has just come in. Peter, this has just come into our inbox, and I will read it out now. 6:25, it has just arrived. New Zealand First Leader, Right Honourable Winston Peters, will make an announcement in the Beehive Theaterette shortly. So we have the Beehive Theaterette streaming in. We would love to keep you all here for that announcement. Matthew, I know you've got to go and collect your daughter from cricket, right?
I do.
Yeah, good dad. That stuff matters. Peter Dunn, go Sandra. Peter Dunn, you have a different view on from Sandra Lee, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think the Greens made a tactical error not talking to National, and I say that for this reason. Had they done so, had they been able to conclude an arrangement with National, we would have a National Green government in place, no role for New Zealand First. This was a now or never election for New Zealand First. I think the Greens would have preempted them. I think they would have essentially either knocked them back into a small fourth place or got rid of them altogether, because I think that Winston wouldn't have stuck around. And I just think it's a golden opportunity for securing their own future as the third player in New Zealand politics that they've missed completely.
I think it's particularly difficult for the Greens just at the moment ever to even consider that option. And the reason for that, ironically, is because of Materia Ture's demise, which, of course, this program had some involvement in. Had she still been the co-leader of the Green Party, she has such respect from the Green Party activists, there is no doubt about Materia Ture's radicalism, that it would be possible, potentially, for someone like her to have said, look, under these particular circumstances, I'm going to make a phone call to Bill English from the nasty National Party, and this is why. But unfortunately, James Shaw doesn't have that same mana with the Green Party activists. He comes from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He helped the National Party's 1996 campaign in Wellington Central because his friend was the National Party candidate. And so those Green activists, I just don't think would have allowed him at all under these circumstances to call Bill English. But maybe in the future, when there is a Green Party leader who the Green Party activists have no doubt about their commitment to social justice and the environment. There's someone like Materia Toure or Rod Donald or Jeanette Fitzsimons, then there might be circumstances they could approach national. But I do understand, I think they should have done it. I agree with Peter in principle, but I think James Shaw would immediately have lost his job as leader had he done that.
Peter, one thing we haven't discussed tonight is we haven't talked about Jacinda Ardern and we haven't talked about Bill English. Now, the announcement is imminent and people now seem to be picking that Winston Peters is going with Labour. I haven't got a clue and I am not predicting anything. But Peter Dunn, let's talk about Bill English. John Key was seen as a kind of Midas touch politician, wasn't he? A man who kept National connected with the constituency, with ordinary folk. And when he went, I mean, there was even that Tom Scott cartoon of quoting Kenny Rogers, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, know when to run. The sense had been that Bill English was left with an inevitable defeat. Now, who knows what's going to happen within the next few minutes, but he has come this close to a fourth term for National, and there hasn't been a fourth term for the lifetime of many New Zealanders, Peter.
That's right, and that's an achievement that whatever the outcome of these negotiations shouldn't be overlooked. He's delivered a vote for National which was nearly as high, if not higher, than when they first got elected in 2008. He's seen off all his critics. It would be the ultimate dessert for him, really, to now be able to secure the Prime Ministership in his own right. But even if he doesn't, I don't think his achievement should be diminished in any way. He's ensured that the National Party in opposition is going to be strong, and that's obviously bodes well for their future. But he's going to also be remembered as the nearly man. He was a brilliant Minister of Finance. He got the Prime Ministership eventually, but it may just be snatched from him by events beyond his control.
Yeah, well, we're about to find out. There is an advisory. It is now 5 minutes old. It says New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters will make an announcement in the Beehive Theaterette shortly. Somebody saying on Twitter, I've never heard the word theaterette so often. It's a funny old place, the Beehive Theaterette, but it is, of course, only used as a rule, except in rare circumstances, by government sundry. And so Winston Peters is going to come in and he is going to tell us who will be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand. How do you think Jacinda Ardern will go if it's her?
I think she'll do a very good job. She was given, let's face it, a real hospital pass when Andrew Little stood down, and she absolutely campaigned her heart out. And I remember at kick-off people saying, well, does she have the stamina? And right up until the last day of the election campaign, that poor woman buried her nana and got back on the campaign trail. She's got true grit. She's bright. She's highly experienced for her age, and I think she'll do a really good job. One of the things I picked up throughout the election campaign was a real sense of urgency from people in my extended whānau and hapu who'd never voted before. They're builders, they're nurses, they're young, and they're not bothered. But this time they voted, and they voted because they saw her as being a person of their generation. And I think what we've witnessed with Ardern is, whatever happens with Winston, a genuine generational shift. Can I just pick up on one more point, and that is this too. Bill English, a year or two ago, boasted that he perfected the art of being boring. But in fairness to him, he did an excellent job in this election campaign for his political party. But if there was one thing throughout the whole campaign that absolutely appalled me, it was the consistency of Bill English and Stephen Joyce to insist that there was an $11.7 billion hole in Labour's budget and that Jacinda Ardern was going to put up individuals' tax. Now, they both knew, and anybody who knows them they knew, that simply wasn't true. And I don't think any political party any, should ever be rewarded for such bad behaviour. It was very Donald Trump.
I said at the time, even where I speak as a centre-right political commentator, I mean, I believe that was a fabrication by Stephen Joyce and Bill English. But what it did highlight, and this is going to be a major challenge for Jacinda Ardern if she is going to, and Grant Robertson, the assumed finance minister, it did highlight that they have not provided any money in their budget except for health and education. There is no money for more money for police. There's no extra money for pay rises for public servants or anything like that. They are going to have to run, if they're going to stick to their fiscal targets, zero budgets outside of health and education, as austere as anything Bill English ran in the early part of the John Key government. Now, I don't know if Labour and the Greens and New Zealand First are going to stick to what they have sworn black and blue is a very austere fiscal policy. The other thing that the new Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is likely to be tested on...
You're stating this as fact now.
Well, it's coming. I think that's most likely. If she does become Prime Minister, she is going to have to go to Hanoi next month in just a couple of weeks as a new Prime Minister. She will be meeting there with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and also the Prime Minister of Japan, and she is expected to be asking to make changes to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She has also said she wishes to make changes to the free trade agreement that New Zealand has with South Korea, at the same time as the Koreans are saying to Donald Trump, back off, you're not making changes to our trade deal. I think it is extremely unlikely that Justin Trudeau and the Japanese and the Koreans are going to agree to the changes to those trade agreements that Jacinda Ardern is seeking. And that is going to create an issue. Will New Zealand be pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is something New Zealand has lobbied for 20 years? Or will Jacinda Ardern accept that Justin Trudeau will not accept the changes that she wants? Similarly with the Korean deal, is she really going to say that she's going to withdraw from the South Korean Free Trade Agreement? These are decisions that she is going to have to make in just a few weeks.
Matthew Hooton stating, if you're just joining us on CHEC, Matthew Hooton with the time at 25.5 to 7, so we're still on air. Matthew stating, as fact now almost, that Jacinda Ardern is becoming Prime Minister. We don't know that yet. So people are increasingly speculating that that's the case, but we are on standby, and we have been told by New Zealand First and Winston Peters' office that the announcement is imminent. So it is going to happen very shortly. Peter Dunn, we are on standby to find out who the next Prime Minister of New Zealand will be. How do you think Jacinda Ardern will go, Peter Dunn, if it's her?
Well, if it's her, I think the first thing is she'll be a very different Prime Minister to the type we've had, certainly for the last two, if not the last three. So I think she'll need a bit of time to develop her own style and tone. I think that she's going to rely fairly heavily on those around her, and it may well be that if Winston Peters is in a key role within the cabinet, then he's going to play a much greater role in supporting and mentoring the new Prime Minister if it's her. But I think that it's going to be a huge challenge. It was a big challenge stepping up from the opposition front bench to be the party leader 4 weeks out from an election. To then make the next huge step to be Prime Minister is going to be massive, and I think she's going to really have to get a lot of support to be able to make that step fairly quickly, because the funny thing about New Zealanders is we like to give people a fair go, but we're actually also a bit unforgiving. Once they're there, we expect miracles immediately.
Yes, we're about to find out. And the Herald are reporting that Jacinda Ardern is holding the stand-up immediately after Winston Peters has had his announcement, his formal announcement in the theatre. Gosh, it's a terrible thing reading the tea leaves, so let's not. I do want to say, Sandra Lee, Matthew Hooton and Peter Dunn, thank you so much for joining us live. You've been on air for half an hour now as we wait and wait and wait, and you came on to discuss what had been announced and it hasn't been announced, so we are very, very grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
So,
thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you. But we want to keep you.
I think then talking about Bill English and his campaign with that black mark that Sandra mentioned with the 11.7 billion.
And you think that's a fair black mark?
Yeah, it's a fair black mark. I mean, they raised an issue. They should have raised it sensibly rather than stupidly. But anyway, but I think National should stick with him. I think that if they are going into opposition, and if this new government is being formed, which has some very diverse characters, as we've been talking about, and it will only have a 3-seat majority, there has got to be a chance, not a good one, but a chance that it will fail. and that voters will have a sense of buyer's remorse with this new assumed Jacinda Ardern, Winston Peters, James Shaw government. Now, if that's the case and there is an election, even if it's 2020 or earlier, if National was to run a buyer's remorse PR strategy for an election campaign, it has to have the product that was available. It has to have the same product. And I think it would be a profound mistake for National to change its leader if they are going into opposition right away, for the main reason that the new leader of the National Party would not get the media attention because they'd be completely overshadowed by the new Prime Minister if it is Jacinda Ardern. And so I think they should stick with Bill English for a good year and see what happens to the new government. If Jacinda Ardern turns out to be a great success, then it'll be bye-bye Bill. But it remains to be seen, and I think he at least deserves a good year as leader of the opposition.
Sandra Lee, what do you think about that? What would you do if you were the Nats? Would you... and there are some ambitious people within that caucus, aren't there, by golly, who wouldn't mind a crack at the top job. What would you do, Sandra Lee?
I think the smart money should Jacinda Ardern become the Prime Minister be on keeping Bill English for at least 1 year. He's an incredibly experienced politician. He will be very useful as the leader of the opposition against a young incoming Prime Minister. And anyway, as we know, with political parties, if they kill off their leader too soon after an election, invariably you see 2, 3, even 4 more coming in their wake.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, exactly. So I think a period of stabilisation would be the smart money for National. Can I just pick up on a point that Matthew raised earlier when he talked about the Korean Free Trade Agreement and the changes that Ardern will soon be seeking to it? I thought she made the point in the final leaders' debate very well when she pointed out that what she will be seeking is a excuse me, I've got a cold. What she will be seeking is a reservation to prevent non-citizen, non-resident foreign speculation in our residential housing market. And as she pointed out, the Koreans themselves already have that proviso. So any of the signatories would have difficulty given that they already have that reservation themselves, objecting to New Zealand having it.
The Prime Minister of South Korea, I think, is a little bit concerned at the moment about the prospect of nuclear war and a military attack. I'm not sure that dealing with a technical change to a free trade agreement is going to be his priority.
Peter Dunn, are you missing this? Do you wish you were still in Parliament? Is all of this, as we are about to find out who the next Prime Minister of New Zealand, who the next government of New Zealand will be, do you miss it?
No, I don't actually. I thought I might, but I'm enjoying watching it, but I'm certainly not missing it.
Is it brutal?
It can be, and I think that this process has been particularly brutal, and there will be some big winners and some mighty big losers. And spare a thought for the losers, because they've been out there every day trying to keep up this popular face that they've got a deal that's going to work, and suddenly they find they've got 3 years of opposition ahead of them, or it may be less. But
Peter, can I push you on that? The losers. I mean, obviously, because this is a coalition negotiation, and either National or Labour are going to be excluded from the coalition. So clearly, on the face of it, there will be a loser, obviously. But in terms of the personalities involved, Bill English has done, as we were discussing, something quite remarkable in retaining the National Party support at fundamentally the same level that John Key delivered. Jacinda Ardern took a Labour Party that was languishing in the low to mid-20s and actually looked in desperate need of some CPR up to 36.9% of the party vote. So she looks like she's done phenomenally well too. So are the leaders at risk of looking like serious losers, whatever the outcome?
Well, the way our system operates, they will be the one who's not Prime Minister will be seen to be the loser, and I think you've just highlighted some pretty considerable achievements on both their parts, which we shouldn't overlook. Ardern rescued the Labour Party from oblivion. English achieved a result for National that they wouldn't have dreamed of getting a year ago. So they've both done remarkably well. They're both very capable people, and whichever of them ends up as Prime Minister, I think the country can be proud of. But they also are human beings, and they'll have those natural emotions and tensions and frustrations and the whole sense of, to hell with it, let's go and do something else. And I think they've just got to come back, as Bill English said, I came back, I've got to come back and do it again.
I'm just checking. Peter, we were listening to you. We're just, someone's yelling, we've lost sound. I think we were hearing Peter loud and clear then. We were, Peter. We were hearing you loud and clear. Sandra Lee, do you ever miss it? You've been out of it a long time now. Do you ever think, oh, I wouldn't mind getting back?
Never. Never. Not at all. I'm a very political person. I was raised in a very political family, and I remain a political person and care passionately about the issues that are dear to my heart, the conservation of New Zealand's biodiversity, my own people, the survival of our language. I could go on for hours, but in truth, I found my many years in local government far more rewarding looking back than I did my years in Parliament. In many ways, our Parliament is quite a dysfunctional institution. Who really asks real questions at question time? They're pretty few and far between. I can remember being in Parliament once. We were under urgency. There was a filibuster going on, change and to that and this to that. And a little 5-year-old up in the public gallery said to her father, "They think they're smart, don't they, Dad?" And every parliamentarian looked up at the father, who was like a stunned mullet, who actually wanted to say yes, but didn't like to. No, I don't miss it.
How do we stop people being cynical about politics when it matters so much, Matthew Hooton?
Well, I think that there should be a degree of cynicism about politics. These are people who wish to have enormous powers over us. They wish to be able to extract a hunk of our income and allocate it to other people. That's an enormous power. Obviously, at the most extreme level, they maintain the power to send our military into harm's way. So I think we should be, perhaps cynical is too strong, but we should be very, very sceptical of the motivations of anybody who wishes to have those types of power over other human beings. So I don't have a problem with a bit of cynicism in the system.
We're waiting.
Well, I do, and
Sandra?
I think therein lies our problem to a certain extent. I remember the words of John Pilger when he once said, there should always be room for scepticism, but we need to avoid cynicism like the plague. And I think there's too much cynicism in New Zealand politics, quite frankly.
It's true
I think that the way in which these negotiations are being conducted in parallel, the sort of the Dutch auction that's been going on, I think they fuel public cynicism. I think if we had a much better system whereby there was much more order in the process in terms of the largest party having the first right to attempt to form a government, and then if that fails, moving to the second party, I think people would see that as a more credible process than this pretty unedifying procedure we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
We are waiting. Let's have a look. Kelvin at the Beehive Theatre Red. I'm hoping that Winston Peters is just going to leap into shot. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, we are talking Sandra Lee, Peter Dunn and Matthew Hooton, generously giving us their time and insight and expertise and opinions, for which we are very grateful as we wait for an announcement that 20 minutes ago was promised shortly by Winston Peters. I guess there could be last-minute jockeying. I guess he could have called National and said, I'm going with Labour, and they could have said, you want to be Prime Minister? Who knows?
I hope this show doesn't become the New Zealand version of Dewey defeats Truman. We may have just spent an hour nearly talking about Prime Minister assumed Jacinda Ardern, except for John, who's been very professional and hasn't, and then he comes and Winston announced Bill English. But I don't think so somehow.
Actually, Chris Simpson has just said on Twitter, in 1996 I was in the PM's office for the announcement. Half an hour before it, Winston Peters wrangled Treasurer out of us. We gave it to him. 96. One-term government in 96, 99, then the National Party fell apart. 2005, 2008, the Labour Party just exhausted its way out of government, didn't it? Winston Peters has never done longer than a term, has he?
Well, to be fair to Winston Peters, that the cause of his failure in that 96 to 99 era, I think, has a lot to do with the National Party backbench not liking what happened. And I think that while the New Zealand First people, if you've been talking to them over the last few days privately, they'll say, look, we are worried about the prospect of what's been described as the opposition from hell, a very strong National Party, with 44% of the voters in opposition. We've never seen an opposition like that in New Zealand before. But at the same time, balancing that, if there is to be, or was to be, a Bill English, Winston Peters government, there would be, by my count, 39 national backbenchers, some of whom would be demoted ministers, others who felt they should be ministers and didn't get promotion. And I'm telling you, they would have tried to undermine Bill English and Winston Peters the way the National Caucus undermined Jim Bolger and Winston Peters.
Peter Dunn, Sandra Lee and Matthew Hooton, who was speaking then, thank you so much. We understand Winston Peters is on his way to the Beehive Theatre. Peter, Sandra and Matthew, feel free, please, to stay, because we would love your expertise afterwards. But I also know, Matthew, you've got to go to cricket. Go and pick, well, it's, you know, good dad. I wish I'd done more of that stuff instead of working. And Peter and Sandra, we're going to take the media conference. So Peter, Winston Peters is going to make an announcement. We'll take the media conference live. So once it starts, why don't we all kind of stand down and then we can potentially call you back. But I do want to thank you all for your time talking in the absence of actually any declaratory announcement, any real information to go on for the best part of 40 minutes. We really appreciate your generosity and your expertise. Thank you, Matthew Hooton, Peter Dunn and Sandra Lee. We really appreciate it. I may have just so grandly and gratefully thanked everyone. The bugger still hasn't turned up. Winston Peters first became Deputy Prime Minister in 1996 under Jim Bolger, Treasurer in 1996, as we were just discussing, Foreign Affairs Minister under Helen Clark in 2005, Minister of Māori Affairs, and he is now walking into the theaterette. He is walking into the theaterette now, Minister of Māori Affairs under Jim Bolger way back in 1990. Here he comes, we believe. There's Shane Jones walking in, so the New Zealand First Caucus is arriving ahead of him. If you are listening, we are in the corridors of Parliament heading towards the Beehive Theaterette, where Winston Peters is about to make his announcement, we understand, any moment.
This begins Winston Peters' last chance to make his political career really mean something. He first stood for Parliament for National in 1975 in Northern Maori. He first entered Parliament in 1979 for Hunua after an electoral petition. His career, it has to be said, has not been overwhelmingly successful. He has spent a very short time in office, in high office, although he has held high offices. By my calculation, less than 3 years in cabinet and more than 30-something years in Parliament. This is his last chance to make everything that he's worked for over these 40 years mean something. It's going to begin tonight, but if this government is not successful, if it does not last for 3 years, it will not have been worth it, the time he has devoted to politics. So this is a very, very important beginning for Winston Peters.
New Zealand first voted out of Parliament in 2008 on an election night in 2008, and it was ignominious, and they were tossed out. It's not over yet, he said. We'll reorganise ourselves in the next few months and we'll see what 2011 might hold for all of us. You're right, Matthew Hooton. He doesn't have an overwhelming successful track record in government, but by God, he is a redoubtable, singular, tenacious, opportunistic and extraordinary politician. And ladies and gentlemen, we are watching now as he walks into the Beehive Theaterette. He is surrounded by media. Patrick Gower from News Hub is asking him questions as he talks. He is not, of course, answering them because he will not be robbed of this extraordinary set-piece occasion.
Thank you very much for coming along and for being patient and waiting out this event. You may not believe it, but I am truly grateful to you that you've turned up. Let's begin by thanking both the National and Labour parties for the manner in which these negotiations have been conducted and the work that they have put into it. It should be said that during this time, elements of how politics should operate in an MMP environment were seen with great clarity. On 23rd September election day, the effect of over 446,000 votes, or 70% of the total, were not known. We believed on election night that those uncounted votes would have a profound effect on the final outcome. That's why New Zealand First waited until October 7 to find out exactly the numbers we were dealing with and what that meant before beginning negotiations with interested parties and bringing this matter to finality as soon as we could in the most responsible time. We started negotiations the day after, on October 8. We believe that 11 days from start to finish is not too long to wait and stands in stark contrast to the months that it will take the composition of the German government to be known. Germany had an election on the 24th of September, the day after ours. New Zealanders will know the outcome of their election day tonight. The German people will now not know the outcome of their election until December. Now, this is a decision made by New Zealand First, and it's their decision, not that of the leader. Every New Zealand First MP and board member is a witness to that. We consult, and that's been our case and our policy for the last 24 years. Now, personally, I have entered into 2 governmental agreements with Prime Ministers from different parties. We've shaken hands on it, and both those former Prime Ministers have confirmed that as a result of that agreement, I entirely, utterly, totally kept my word. In the last campaign, the Labour Party and the Green Party campaigned as an alternative government. On the question of the numerical construction of that government, New Zealand First was never consulted. But many commentators factored in our support as a given. That enabled the National Party and others in a grouping of 4 parties to claim that they were facing a group of 3 parties, and where New Zealand First was concerned, voters should, to quote them, cut out the middleman, end of quotes. Now, whether people like it or not, the strategies of both those alternatives failed. That is why we are in the position we are in now. That said, the decision that is about to be announced does not represent just over 7% of the vote, or 70%, or dare I say it, 45%. This decision represents the majority in an MMP environment, in an MMP parliament. The government I was first a member of, for example, had under 40% of the vote and less than 10,000 than the opposition party got in that election. On the agreement we've reached is a summation of the policies that survived the negotiations. I want to stress that. It is a summation of the policies that survived the negotiations. As the song goes, you can't always get what you want. Our negotiations have taken place against a backdrop of changing international and internal economic circumstances which we cannot ignore. We in New Zealand First believe that an economic correction or a slowdown is looming, and that the first signs are already here. In the housing market slowdown, in Reserve Bank and trading banks' nervousness, in the cessation of hot money from abroad, in property ownership concerns, in receding consumer optimism, and in ebbing retailer confidence. There were great risks in whatever decision we made, and despite our having had no influence on these risks, some will attempt, when the looming dangers come, to heap the blame on us. That those blame caricatures are both spurious and misplaced won't stop attempts to misdescribe the cause of these events. That's why we are putting this scenario out front right now, so that such attempts will fail. Awareness of looming consensus has affected our decision. Our choice today relates to how best we mitigate, not worsen, what is coming, we believe, and its impact on as many New Zealanders as is possible. Now, can I say this? As a party, New Zealand First believes that it has secured major policies to advance the New Zealand economic and social condition. Big or small, all of these policies are important. When we construct the formal agreement summating those matters we have negotiated, these policies will be published. It is not my privilege or responsibility to summarise and announce them today. That'll be for someone else. Can I just say, far too many New Zealanders have come to view today's capitalism not as their friend, but as their foe. And they are not all wrong. That is why we believe that capitalism must regain its human face. That perception has influenced deeply New Zealand First negotiations. We had a choice to make, whether it was either with National or Labour, for a modified status quo or for change. In our negotiations, both National and Labour were presented with that opportunity, working together, cooperating together for New Zealand. That's why in the end we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. Peters, how many portfolios have you got in this new government?
Well, it's a sizable list, but some are big and some are small, and it's up to the Labour leader to announce those when we've completed all our negotiations.
Do you think the Greens will be signing off on this when they have their meeting with the delegates tonight?
Well, that is not my province either. We entered the negotiations with Labour, knowing that they would handle separately the Greens. We were always going to be in a coalition government with one party, not more, and that is an answer that I can't give. It has to be given by somebody else.
Have you talked to Bill English yet?
Jacinda Ardern is up to the job of being Prime Minister.
Pardon?
Do you believe the experience of Jacinda Ardern is up to being Prime Minister?
Well, we wouldn't have made the decision if we didn't.
What qualities do you believe she'll bring to the job?
Well, I think, amongst other things, she exhibited extraordinary talent in the campaign itself, from a very hopeless position to a position where they are in the office of being the next government today.
Winston Peters, do you think that this government arrangement and the set of policies that you have can bring about significant change to the economic structure of New Zealand? Was that the difference by the sounds of your speech?
Well, our perception was that the people of this country, regardless of what a lot of people say, did want change. And we've responded to that. And I believe in the affirmative, what you said, it's going to happen. That's what we're going to put all our efforts into, to make sure it works, and we get the change that this country believes it needs.
Did you call Jacinda Ardern before coming here?
No.
So she found out through your live...
Well, this decision is owed first to the New Zealand people. They are, after all, the people that put us here. Not politicians, the New Zealand voters.
Mr. Peters, what role will you have in the coalition government? Can you tell us?
Can I tell you? Well, let me just say that any role I've got is in agreement with the Prime Minister if I decided to do it.
So you haven't agreed on...
Can you tell us what that was? Sorry. Can you tell us what that...
Well, if I choose to be the Deputy Prime Minister, then that was made clear to me.
Yep.
And if I chose to take certain portfolios, then we would discuss it with the Prime Minister. And I don't want to say which ones those are.
What will this mean to exporters in particular who live in the regions?
Well, I hope it means that we will start returning to an economy that understands we live or die by exporting, that exporting against GDP has been in decline and that we've got to turn it around. Unless we get far more people, far more successfully, businesses and enterprises and individuals offshore bringing money back to the family in New Zealand, then the slide we are currently on will continue.
Will that require a fall in the dollar to achieve, do you think?
Well, if you've got every... Now, I've got to tell you that we have not got the Minister of Finance's job, and it's for him to answer those questions. But if the IMF and every other commentator has been saying, including the head of the Reserve Bank, that our dollar's overvalued, then perhaps the political system should respond to it. And they've been saying it for an awful long time.
Do you expect a change to the Reserve Bank Act?
Yes, I do.
What issues, Mr. Peters, are to the forefront of your thinking? What have they been during these negotiations?
Well, I think the biggest issue has been this. We heard and we've read many comments about poverty and a changing condition and the concentrating of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. We wish to address that issue. And it's not an old-fashioned sentiment. We did it hugely in past decades in our great history, and we want to be part of doing it again.
What about portfolio areas? I mean, what, not necessarily portfolios, but policy. What policy areas to the forefront of your mind?
Well, regional development is most definitely. Redressing the infrastructure deficit, particularly in the regions, is definitely to the forefront of our thinking, and key achievements like that. but that's for others, the Prime Minister to announce as her perspective.
Do you have a view, Mr Peters, on whether the Greens are part of the coalition or what position they're likely to take in this?
No, they've got a confidence and supply agreement with the Labour Party. We have a coalition agreement with the Labour Party. We're in coalition with the Labour Party. They are outside the government in support of it.
But will they have ministers outside Cabinet where you will be sharing Cabinet committees?
Well, it's really the province of the Prime Minister to tell you that. We're going to start off and do this right.
Will this mean the end of the TPP?
Pardon?
Will this mean the end of the TPP as far as New Zealand is concerned?
Well, we're in agreement to look at the Investors' Disputes Clause. There is an answer to that, of course, because in 2001 there was a solution written into the Singapore-New Zealand deal, which somehow escaped people. And the other interest is the ownership of land and homes in this country. And on that we've got agreement with the Labour Party.
So what would you say on the change to foreign ownership?
What's the agreement?
What's the agreement about the change to foreign ownership?
What we both campaigned on.
What would you say to people, Mr Peters?
You do remember what that was, don't you? Yeah. Thank you very much.
What would you say to people that would say that, well, hang on, National has got 10 more seats than Labour, surely they should have been the government?
Well, 45% is not a majority of Parliament under MMP. As I say, I was a member of Parliament with a party that got 39.8 or 9% a long time ago, and the Labour Party got 40%. We are operating in an MMP environment. Today, the majority view of this country is for the change that's happening.
Do you have a message to National tonight?
Yeah, I do. It was really extraordinarily disappointing in a way to have to make this decision, but it always was inevitable. I thought the way they went about the talks, as I said, showed MMP in a new light with great clarity to us. And I suppose we all came away wishing we had done this far more often.
When did you come to your decision today?
We came to the decision exactly about a quarter of an hour before we got the car and came across here, and that's a fact. And that is the caucus gave me their vote individually, and so did the board individually, and so we knew what we had when I read them. And of course, all of those votes are open for the caucus to look at tomorrow morning.
What was the key difference between the National and the Labour offers that made it for you?
Well, I can't talk for all of my caucus colleagues. You can only try and summate or précis what their comments would have been. But all around the country, people felt that we could and should be doing far better. That there are far too many people living in degraded and poor circumstances in this country, and that too many people in the power structure of New Zealand are simply out of touch. That was the biggest thing that changed, I think, my caucus, and by the looks of it, my board as well.
What changes do you expect in housing?
Well, first of all, I'd expect there to be fewer people coming here so that we can begin to handle the demand side, and that we start building 10,000 affordable homes per year. And affordable homes is what we're talking about, which we clarified in the negotiations, that New Zealanders can hope to get on the rung of home ownership as first homeowners far more than has been the case in recent times.
And how much of a reduction in migration do you expect?
Pardon?
How much of a reduction in migration do you expect?
I think any forward forecast would see that, and Treasury's been announcing that for a long time, except it's never come to fruition. They've been saying it ad infinitum. Maybe it's a palliative to those of us who are concerned about it. But we mean to ensure that we have a much more accurate and certain immigration stream of skills and excellence and genuine export education. I think the Prime Minister could say more about that, but that's the two things, those are two things we agreed upon, and that should have a profound effect on change. I don't think it's going to have any concern for the people out in parts of New Zealand who desperately need skilled workers, but it's the massive number that were coming who are not skilled that concerned us.
Will the poor be moved in north? Mr Peters, were they, the caucus and the board, were they unanimous?
Not quite.
Well, how many detractors did they have?
Well, enough for me to be totally confident that we had a consensus rather than a vote. It wasn't a vote, it was a statement.
So not everybody agreed with it?
Well, it's always been our practice that if you've got anything like 30%, 20% disagreement in caucus, to go over the subject again and persuade others to the cause and the soundness of what you're arguing. We've always followed that policy, and I'm pleased to say that tonight, that's what we got.
Will the port be moving north?
This afternoon that National had been negotiating, and you were asking for more ministers, and that was one of the reasons why there was delay and possibly why you didn't go with National. Is there any truth in that?
Like so many comments that I've read in the last few weeks, and I don't want to give you my personal view of it. I think you might already know what it is. I was accused of holding the country to ransom when 400,000 plus votes hadn't been counted, and it never stopped. And you know where it came from. But I'm not going to be pointed and personal about the matter. Let me just say that that statement is utterly, totally false, and I've got a record to prove it.
Will Auckland...
Quite the converse.
You asked for fewer seats?
Well, it's not for me it's not for me to divulge what went on there because we've sworn to secrecy. And since 1996, we have never divulged any of those talks, and we won't divulge these ones either.
Mr. Peters, the dollar has fallen considerably on the news. Are you welcoming that?
Sorry, it fell before this announcement and a long time before.
It fell on the announcement as well.
You're a financial reporter, you should know that.
It fell on the announcement too. Is that good news, though? That's one of your prime policies.
I thought you were blaming me for it.
Mr. Peters, will the Auckland port be moved north?
Again, that'll be something that the Prime Minister will talk about.
Mr. Peters, did you agree on a significant change or any particular change to the Reserve Bank Act or the monetary policy setting?
I think it'd be fair to say that if you have a look at the Labor Party statements on this and our statements on this, including two bills that failed by one vote 2 times, that would be where this change will take place. I'm not letting anything out.
So you're talking about making inflation a part of the Reserve Bank's, the New Zealand dollar a part of the Reserve Bank's mandate as well? Or employment, sorry.
Actually, the dollar is what it ends up at the end of the mandate. It's not part of it, right? But you're a financial reporter, you should know that.
So will you reintroduce, can you see the private members bill that failed coming back as a government bill?
Well, I could see something like that because, you know, again, we've got to talk with the Labour Party as to how we redraft this. And I'm not going to claim that it could be that bill, but all I hope is can probably announce that we will be satisfied with it.
Do you expect to go the full whole hog in terms of the Singapore model, or will we still be using the official cash rate as the prime monetary policy tool rather than the currency?
We should go down the road of the Singapore model. They are an economic success story and a standout one without any resources but their people and their intelligence. But I didn't secure that.
You didn't secure using the exchange rate?
Not the Singapore model.
Do you have a message for the...
Pardon?
Can you confirm that all ministerial portfolios...
Sorry, can I over here one at a time?
What about the future of the Māori seats?
Well, the Maori seats are now back in the hands of the Labour Party.
Was there discussions during the talks with them about those seats?
Well, you know, if people want policy, they've got to vote for it, and we didn't get enough votes to push that home. I say again, if you don't get enough votes, you cannot get the change. A lot of people want change, but when it comes to voting, they're fast on the lip and slow on the voting hip. That's what happened. But remember this, that the majority of Maori entitled to be on the Maori roll aren't on it. And of those ones on it, half didn't vote. The MMP has been profoundly influential in giving far greater Maori representation in this country. That's what the Royal Commission said the MMP would do, and it's happened. And I hope there comes a time when we, as a people, respond to it so that we have one franchise.
Can you confirm that the ministerial positions you have are all in a coalition, that they would all be at a cabinet table?
Yes.
And you can't say, or you're leaving it to Mother Dern to say exactly how many that is and the
Yes.
specific portfolios?
Well, I'm really here to make the announcement. Now, for the Prime Minister to tell you the details of that.
When do you expect to be sworn in?
Well, that'll depend on the calendar. Don't forget we've got Labor Weekend coming. It'll be the normal diary, but well in time to be ready for the next sitting of Parliament.
But will you expect to sit down with her to form the next cabinet?
Yes, I mean...
In the next couple of days?
Well, with all the speed we possibly can. But the major decision has been made, and all the factors inside that decision have been concluded. Anything we haven't sorted out, I hope we sort out in good faith.
What will be your first action in government? What will be the first thing you do?
What'll be the first thing I do in government? I can't tell you until I get there.
Mr Peters, retired couples stood to get an extra $640 a week under the budget changes that National is proposing for next year. What can you say tonight to senior citizens who may be concerned that they will lose from this choice that you've made?
Well, if you look at the target we have for the minimum wage and realise that that is factored into eventually the 66% of the net average weekly wage that retired couples get, they will do better out of that than what is being offered by the National Party. The second thing is, the last time we were in government or affected by and had a chance to influence government, we took the minimum wage in 3 years flat from $9 to $12 an hour. No one has ever done that, and the whole economy didn't collapse. People were simply better off, and so were the older people of this country.
Mr Peters, are you confident the Greens will support this deal?
Well, you have to ask the Greens that, and they're just down the road.
Have you had any dialogue with them at all?
No, because I didn't campaign with the Greens.
How do you know they've got
the reality is that you people, well, not you, but some of you, gaily went out every day talking about the alternative government and put us in as a factor without even consulting us. This is what this announcement is tonight about.
How do you know
While we are not in that position, never were, and have been mischaracterised, and we did and lost a serious number of votes because statements were made that were simply not true. Now, you don't go into coalition negotiations with full of recriminations and vengeance, because that doesn't help. I'm just stating a bare fact.
Do you think you'll be able to work with them, though?
Sorry?
Do you think you'll be able to work with them and get along with them?
Well, some of you people have said I hate the Greens and I hate James Shaw, and I can tell you this for a fact that I have never said, privately or publicly, a bad word about them. That is a fact.
How do you think you can work with them?
Well, if you apologise to them for what you've said about me, where they're concerned, then we'll probably get on fine, yes.
How do you know they've got a supply and confidence agreement with Labor then? As you said before.
Because the Labor Party told you, and they told me, that they had an arrangement with the Greens, and I trust them to have kept it.
Rather than a full coalition, though, is that what you're saying?
But they're not in full coalition. That's the point. This coalition is the Labor Party and the New Zealand First Party coalition.
Will you allow any Green MPs to be members of Cabinet? Will the Greens sit out?
You're going to have to ask the leader of the Labor Party that.
So it's up to her?
No. You're going to have to ask her for the answer. I know the answer, but it's for her, because she's spoken to the Greens and has arranged with the Labor Party with the Greens, to tell you with precision what it is, because she has seen it. I have not.
There was allegations during the campaign, or arguments during the campaign, that there was an urban-rural split, and that particularly focused on Labor's proposal for a water tax. What have you been able to achieve in terms of the water tax and in terms of the outlook for the rural communities which you represent?
Well, when it's announced and when the summation of all our talks is put in a formal document, and that's going to take a few days, but we all have a record of it, you'll know that we've done the best we possibly could for the people out in the rural sector and their concerns.
And will they be happy?
They should be.
What about the arrangements for New Zealand superannuation and the New Zealand Superannuation Fund? What do you expect?
Well, the Greens were always going to start contributing to the fund. Sorry, the Labor Party was always going to start contributing to the fund far faster than the National Party. And I can say we have always subscribed to the view that we should never stop making those contributions, because we'd probably be at $53 billion now. And if Treasury thought it was a smart idea, maybe it just was, in this case, a good idea.
Is it possible New Zealand First could hold both the foreign affairs and defence portfolios?
Well, I haven't completed negotiations on that, but it's a possibility, yes.
So sorry, you haven't completed negotiations on what roles New Zealand First will have in the government?
Yes, we haven't completed those. We've had a extraordinarily constructive talk, but in the end you've got to say, no, look, we don't want to put square pegs into round holes, so to speak, in terms of personalities. If you're going to have associate ministers and what have you, let's make sure they can work together. Let's do some serious work on that before we just make the decision.
But you have
That's what we agreed to do.
Are you clear how many ministerial portfolios you'll have, though?
Yes.
Is that set in concrete?
Yes.
And how many is it?
You'll have to ask the Labour Party leader.
But you've definitely agreed to that, shook hands, as it were.
Say?
You've definitely agreed to that.
I haven't had a chance to tell her formally what I've just told you, but no doubt she's watching television, she saw it. We'll shake hands when we've got the agreement all completed and all agreed upon, and we'll keep our word.
So just to be clear, did Bill English find out through the television as well?
I was asked by both the Labour Party and National Party, would I tell them in advance, and I said I have not even thought of that, but I'll tell you if I do intend to do that, and I didn't.
Wouldn't it have been the decent thing to do, to tell the loser?
With respect, the people of this country are the people entitled to know first. They are, after all, who our masters are. It would have been a nice thing to do, but then I probably wouldn't be talking to you and trying to explain things if that had happened.
Were National just not willing to budge on policy?
Well, if you, look at why the New Zealand First Caucus took the view it did, when you survey the economic and social condition of this country, our long-term slide down the OECD, and all the statements, for example, of growth, when you factor in the population increase of 2%, growth is less than 1%, and down the bottom of the OECD, in the end you have to face the blunt reality that far too many New Zealand people are going without, and without hope, and without the chance of knowing that if they save and work hard, next year will be better. That used to be the condition which made New Zealand great one time, because no matter how tough it was, you knew that it would be better next year. That stopped some time ago, and we want to correct that.
The Pike River families will be watching this quite anxiously. What's your message to them tonight?
Say again?
The Pike River families will be watching this anxiously. What's your message to them tonight?
They will be extraordinarily pleased that the commitment I made at the beginning of this year is going to be kept.
Mr. Peters, if Jacinda Ardern hasn't heard from you other than tonight, right now, do you have a message for her at the moment?
Well, I kind of think that the message I put over the airwaves tonight were rather encouraging. What more could I do to make a day a special day?
So is entry to the mine guaranteed?
That's good.
Winston Peters, who has just made Jacinda Ardern the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Thank you for being with us here on RNZ. We took the entire media conference, as you heard, live. If you have just tuned in, if you were driving home or you have just arrived home and you're turning the radio on, we can tell you that Winston Peters is going with Labour. Jacinda Ardern will be the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Not a lot of detail from Winston Peters, but quite interesting stuff early on in that long media conference. He said the choice was between a modified status quo, i.e. National, or change, i.e. Labour, New Zealand First. And he said just before that, can I just say, for too many New Zealanders, capitalism has not been their friend but their foe. Quite a pointed economic declaration in terms of an implicit rationale, in terms of their implicit rationale for going with Labour. They didn't call Jacinda Ardern first. They didn't call Bill English first, like you and me and everyone else in the country, except for the New Zealand First Caucus. They found out at exactly the same time from Winston Peters in that media conference. Let's go to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who has done such a great job talking about nothing really over the past few days. Jane, you have a great deal to talk about now. Are you there?
I am, John. We are literally just heading up now to the Labour Party caucus room where Jacinda Ardern, the incoming Prime Minister, is about to address the media. Now, as you heard in that interview or announcement from Mr Peters, he was not saying exactly how many coalition ministerial positions there are. He said that they have agreed upon a number, but now the negotiations still go on with Jacinda Ardern in terms of what exact portfolios and what exact personnel or the people, the New Zealand First MPs, that will hold those portfolios. He did say, however, we've just got an overloaded list at the moment going up the Labour Party caucus room, so just excuse us.
No, Jane, this is wonderful. So are you in the lift now, travelling up?
I am in the lift with other journos gripping their laptops and their phone chargers. Of course, absolute necessity tools, but no, we're now heading up. The lift is on its way up to the third floor Labour caucus. Now, he did say that if he is offered and it's accepted, he would take the position of Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, he did say that. So he will be Deputy Prime Minister, won't he? I mean, there's just no way that that's not going to be offered and accepted. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
He also said that New Zealand First did not get the Minister of Finance's job. No surprise there at all, Jane, do you think?
No, that was ruled out by both Bill English and Jacinda Ardern during the election campaign. Both of them ruled out Prime Minister and Finance Minister. That line was drawn in the sand very early on. But as we've spoken about, they both left that Deputy Prime Minister position open. Now, he also did talk about some of the portfolios, the portfolio areas that New Zealand First is looking at. And the first one he said was regional development.
Yes, he did.
To address the deficit in the regions and really pour some money in. So no surprise there. And I would imagine that he would have some involvement in that role when a ministerial position is confirmed.
Yes, a lot of what he was talking about was the vibe, right? But I felt that he was very on message when he started talking about regional development. The other things I thought he was on message, that he was getting dangerously close to actually being explicit and specific, was around immigration, a much more accurate and certain level of immigration based upon skills and excellence, although he promised people in the region who desperately need skilled workers that they should not be concerned. The Reserve Bank Act, I thought he was getting close to being quite explicit there. Anything else stand out for you?
That's right. Look, I think it was the immigration that he was talking about. They have obviously agreed a cut to the number, and it sounded like part of it will be in those student visas as well. He was talking about areas that, had been exploited, that weren't quality immigration. But as you said, with that assurance to people, particularly, and this is, the regional New Zealand, we've heard during the election campaign from industries like horticulture, like agriculture, like construction, all important growth areas for New Zealand, that in some areas they just cannot get those workers and they rely heavily on skilled migrants. So he was giving that message to those industries and to those regions. Don't worry, we're not going to stop the flow of people. You need to keep those industries going.
Yeah, that was interesting. Where are you now, Jane? This is lovely. You're walking and talking. Where are you now?
I am up here. I am looking through the doors into the Labour Party corridor. We can't really see much at the moment, but Jacinda Ardern is preparing to come out and talk to the media. We will get more details about exactly how many ministerial positions New Zealand First will have. Now, interestingly too, he did discuss the coalition or the governing arrangements. So New Zealand First will be in coalition, and that is all of the ministerial positions that they have agreed will be at the cabinet table. Now, that also means that New Zealand First has to sign up to every single government policy. They are locked into that cabinet. And he said the Greens, who we haven't talked to yet, are in confidence in supply. Now, James Shaw throughout the campaign had said that he wanted a full coalition deal.
Yes, he did.
He has not got that.
No,
they
he
have
hasn't.
got ministerial, one or other, we don't know the number, outside of cabinet, under a confidence in supply deal. So that was the compromise that the Greens have had to take to be part of this government.
Jane Patterson, you've done such a stunning job over the past 3 weeks or whatever, in fact, during the campaign. We so appreciate it. We're going to leave you momentarily, but we're going to come back to you the moment Jacinda Ardern starts speaking live. So you are standing there waiting for her outside her office. Of course, she'll be moving over to the Beehive, right? Is that all right?
No, she's going to come out through the doors from the Parliament building and the opposition corridors, and we are set to take this announcement live. And we will be bringing it to you on RNZ as soon as she comes out.
Thanks, Jane. We're so grateful. We'll probably be back with you in 30 seconds or something. But let's bring in Mike Williams, who is, of course, a former Labour Party president. Mike, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
I'm absolutely elated and a little bit surprised. I actually picked to go the other way.
What? Did you hear him? Were you watching or listening to him? And I thought where he seemed most pointed and most heated and actually speaking most without spin was when he was talking about the economy. Can I just say, for too many New Zealanders, today's capitalism is not their friend but their foe. And he sounded really heated as he was saying this. It seems like economic factors and a desire, as he said, to go for change rather than a modified status quo was a big driver of this.
Yes, I thought it was a very good speech. It was statesmanlike, and he put his points very clearly. And it's really what he's been saying for a long time, that this neoliberalism has done its dash, and that capitalism has got to be moderated in some way by, government intervention. So he's been absolutely consistent with that. But also, he mentioned that he thinks we've got something like another global financial crisis coming. And that's been reflected in a lot of stuff I've been reading recently in The Economist, where, share markets are grossly overvalued and that sort of thing. So I think there was that element in his decision as well.
Mike, we're keeping you there. Please stay with us. I just want to tell people who are listening, in fact, Kelvin, would you mind whacking this up, even though it is just a wobbly old camera off the shoulder? But if you are listening, what we are seeing is just outside Jacinda Ardern's doors, Mike Williams. She will be moving, of course, from Old Parliament across to the Beehive, where you go when you are Prime Minister. And we are on standby to hear from the woman who is about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. We will go back there the moment she starts talking. Mike Williams, what will she be like as Prime Minister?
Well, I think she'll be stunningly good. I mean, that people have really just fallen in love with her in a big way. If you'd have looked at the Labour Party 4 months ago, you just would not have guessed at this moment. She's turned it round. She's shown an incredibly high level of political skill. She's obviously come up with a coalition agreement that I frankly thought was unlikely. So far so good. But most of all, I think Winston has gone for the new rather than the old. And that is very perceptive of him, in my view.
What do you say to Bill English, who was seen as having been given a hospital pass and actually retained Nationals' vote at fundamentally the same level? John Key, who was seen as the Midas touch politician of our generation. What do you say to him? Because he did get 44% of the vote for the Nats.
I would say to Bill English, bloody bad luck, because that's all it is. A few more percent, this wouldn't have happened. But I would also say I don't think the National Party ran a particularly good campaign. I mean, this outcome of New Zealand First holding the balance of power has been on the cards in the polls for 2.5 years at least. And yet they went after him. They attacked him. They leaked his problems with superannuation. They knocked him over in the Northland seat. Bill English described Winston as, cut out the middleman. That's foolish when all of the polls tell you you're going to have to deal with that. So I have a great deal of sympathy for Bill English. I think he's a fine man. I think he let himself down in that campaign. And I like his ideas around social investment, but, he's going to be a paragraph in a history book.
Gosh, it's a brutal business politics, isn't it, Mike Williams? Thank you so much.
Sure is.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Mike, would you mind can we just keep you on the line for a couple more minutes? Is that all right?
Sure.
Thank you. You're a good bugger, Mike Williams. Mike Williams, thank you so much, former Labour Party President. Russell Norman, former Green Party co-leader. Are we hearing Jacinda Ardern there? No, we're not. Russell, g'day, how are you?
Hi, John. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, they're good. It's a very interesting turn of events.
Is it a win for the Green Party?
I think it is. I mean, in that obviously having a Labor-led government is closer to Green Party policy. So in that sense, I think it is. Obviously, the Greens had a difficult election campaign with not the kind of outcome they wanted. But nonetheless, a change of government is something the Greens have wanted for some time.
I see a statement from Greenpeace earlier saying Greenpeace is cautiously hopeful about the new government. Is the sense now that the environmental agenda, the sort of stuff that you care personally and professionally about so much, will be elevated in terms of the level to which the government gives a damn about it?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, if you saw the way Jacinda defended particularly the policies on water during the election campaign, I mean, she was vigorous in her defence around those water policies, cleaning up rivers. The way she talked about climate change as being the nuclear-free moment of our age, I think those things are very positive. And so I think particularly on freshwater issues and climate change, I think we're likely to see quite a significant change in direction, and I think that would be a very positive thing.
If what the tea leaves we're reading are correct, it looks like New Zealand First are going to have seats in Cabinet. And I don't know this, and no one has said this. So, Russell, this is extrapolation, and I may be wrong, and I apologise in advance if I am, but that the Greens will be excluded from Cabinet. Do you think that's a possibility? And if so, is that an affront to the Memorandum of Understanding? Is it an affront to the Greens' loyalty to Labor when they even excluded the idea of negotiating with National? Do the Greens deserve better if that eventuates?
There's actually swings and roundabouts in this. I mean, so in this respect, if it were to be like that, it would be like 2005, 2008.
Yep.
And the advantage of that is that it will give the Greens more voice. It's just a question of how much voice they'll have. And after, having a pretty damaging election result in many respects, actually it's not a bad thing for the Greens to have a bit more latitude to speak out and rebuild in this period. But at the same time, I mean, obviously it's critically important that we get some progress on some core environmental issues, and I think we're all waiting to see how much we're going to get.
Mike Williams, thank you, Russell Norman. Please stay with us if you don't mind. And I'm sorry for being so cavalier in our gratitude for you. We really appreciate you being there. Mike Williams, are you still there?
I am,
Yeah. What do you think about how the Greens have been treated by a succession of Labor-led governments now? They have never once had a seat at the Cabinet table, and it looks, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, like that is going to continue. Is that fair?
Probably not, but that's the deal you had to do to get Winston on board, and I think it will be a deal that the Greens will want. I knew Rod Donald really well. I used to have regular meetings with him when I was president of the Labor Party and he was co-leader of the Greens. And his ambition was a ministry. And I don't know that it was necessarily a cabinet ministry. From what I'm gathering, they're getting one or two ministers outside of cabinet. Is that what you're hearing?
I think they will be outside cabinet. Russell, have you heard anything along these lines? Russell, are you still there? No, we've heard. Russell, are you still there, bro?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's very likely they'll be outside cabinet.
Yeah. And so, which is money, which is a budget, which is staff, which is profile, which is the ability to shape and create policy, right? So that at a level is a win.
Yeah. I mean, to the extent that they're able to influence those things, I think that's true.
Mm. So what would you like to see this government do? As somebody who has given much of your life to Green politics, and now the Green Party that you led is going to be in some form or other part of a coalition agreement with the Labor government, the Labor-led government. What is the most important thing it can do, do you think, Russell Norman?
Well, I mean, I think clearly on climate change, we need to bring agriculture inside the emissions trading scheme, but it's got to relate to actually reducing the too many cows. We have overdone it on cows, and that impacts on fresh water as well. We need real plans on fresh water, which is going to mean, lower stocking numbers in terms of the impact. And then I think there's a really interesting thing, which is that we're coming up to what's called the block offer, which happens every year, where a whole bunch of oil companies get to bid for the right to drill off in the sea and on the land. And I think it would be great to see a moratorium for a year, at least, on the block offer. Well, we have a national conversation about whether we want to be part of the climate problem by finding and drilling more oil, or whether we want to be part of the climate solution by not proceeding to do that. So I think there's some really interesting things there. Obviously on oceans as well, it would be great to see the Ministry of Primary Industries no longer be captured by the industry it's meant to be regulating. Not to mention, in conservation, there's a huge underfunding problem and a whole bunch of issues there. I mean, there's quite a significant backlog of things we need to do to catch up in terms of the environment.
Russell Norman from the Green Party co-leader and now, of course, the head of Greenpeace New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us, Russell. We really appreciate your time tonight. Mike Williams, are you still there, Mike?
I am, yep.
Thank you. The same question that I asked Russell to you. What is the most important thing, do you think, this Labour-led government with Jacinda Ardern as New Zealand's 40th Prime Minister can do in its first term over the next 3 years?
I think they've got to do something about housing. It's a fundamental human right that far too many people are missing out on. I'd agree with a lot of what was just said. There are environmental deficits that have got to be addressed. And I'd also want a damn good look at wages. Wages simply have not kept up, and people are suffering.
Mike Williams, former Labour Party President, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. It must feel like a wonderful evening for you, and we really appreciate you making us part of it. Thank you, Mike Williams, who was a frequent guest on Checkpoint. Let's go now to Clayton Cosgrove, former Labour Party MP, Waimakariri. Clayton, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, good. My brain is an old and slow thing these days, but I'm going back to the 1993 campaign, the election campaign.
Yeah.
Were you working with Mike Moore then, or am I just making that up?
No, you were a gallery reporter following us around and hounding us incessantly, and yes, I was a senior advisor.
That's right, and I've just had this vivid picture of you and Mike Moore and Sue Foley going around the country in that helicopter with blood on the floor because it was run by a deer shooter, right?
You've got a very good memory too, good mate.
Well, what I also remember, actually, and I don't know whether tonight is the night to talk about it, was how lonely Mike was, because actually a lot of Labour's front bench didn't work very hard in 1993. This has been altogether a more unified, cohesive and singular Labour effort, and it has brought them home, hasn't it?
Yeah, and just you referenced Mike Moore. I spoke with him today. One of the people who'll be absolutely delighted because he's a patriot and is huge value. He will welcome the fact that he's seeing another Labor government in his lifetime. But look, it's a very special moment. I just did ABC Radio in Australia, and I referenced the point that if you look at this, the last guy, and you'll recall, John, we did the 8-week campaign when Mike Moore was Prime Minister, in a different set of circumstances. Well, this is effectively the same. The only guy in our contemporary political history who's pulled one of these off was Bob Hawke, and I think about 6 weeks. And you have to hand it to Jacinda when we were on the 30th of August, I think we were roadkill. We were 22, 23%.
30th of July, right?
No, this was 30th of August, I think you'll find. But anyway, 30th of July, sorry, you're right.
Yeah, she became leader on the 1st of August. Yeah, you're right. But you were right. Yeah. Sorry, the roadkill analogy stands. You were a squashed beast, weren't you?
Yeah. And you have to hand it to her, a 37-year-old who stepped up in extraordinary circumstances and campaigned incredibly well. And I'd make this observation. It is an interesting combination of a very senior statesman in Mr. Peters, who has been around a long time, to link with, what you have to say is a generational step change in the form of Jacinda. And despite no disrespect to your great colleagues in the media, I think if you look back on this process, a couple of weeks since the special, less than 2 weeks since the special votes, and you look at Mr. Peters has said the negotiations were all about policy, and obviously position came right at the end. You'd have to say, how else would you negotiate something like this? So despite the sort of boredom of journalists who, need stories and need to be fed, I think you may look at this compared to overseas jurisdictions and say a pretty efficient process, especially compared to, say, 96, when, what was it, 7 or 8 weeks. But an incredible achievement. And, I've known Jacinda for many years. She's a very close friend. We talk most days. She will have her feet on the ground. She will know the awesome responsibility that's now visited on her. And she will, take that very seriously, because in her view, she's an idealistic person. This is about the country. This is about New Zealand, and this is about trying to deliver for the folks.
Clayton Cosgrove, what does it mean, do you think, to have a government of such disparate components? Now, this was always the intention of MMP, wasn't it? First past the post put an enormous amount of power in the hands of parties that weren't always that representative of New Zealand. 81, of course, post-Springbok tour, when there was such a bitter divide between the provincial electorates that Rob Muldoon won in and the cities, the urban seats. In fact, Labour got more votes by quite a margin in 1981 national. So the MMP was a reaction against that. And the idea of MMP was that we would create coalition governments that were as broad a brushstroke as possible. Now, there has been no more obvious example of it than a government that contains both New Zealand First, with its elderly and socially conservative supporters, and that's a shorthand, and I apologise to people who are New Zealand's First supporters who are neither of those things.
You've just blown your ratings.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the Green Party of Chloe Swarbrick, and so what will this government be able to achieve when it is, in terms of its personnel, such a broad chapel?
Well, with respect, go back to 2005 when I was a Cabinet Minister. We had New Zealand First, we had the Greens in support, Peter Dunn, and go back further to the Alliance and others. And you've had, and with respect to the National Party governments, with due respect to them, you've had stable and largely, I would argue, productive, depending on your point of view, productive government. And I don't think, we say disparate, we say you've got 3 political parties, 2 of which I think are pretty close in their view, a third now which obviously must be close in their policy perspectives, otherwise they wouldn't have signed up with Labour, that is in New Zealand First. And so I think we just need to take a breath and say, governments achieve things. I was part of a government for 9 years, love us or hate us, and a Clark government that did achieve a lot. With the support of other parties. In fact, we've always had minority parties here. I would just say this out of respect, in terms of Mr English and the National Party, I think it's probably appropriate that, we pay tribute to Mr English. I've always held the view, and I know it might sound a cliche, but, it doesn't matter what political stripe you are. I think everybody goes into that parliament wanting to do the right thing, but we disagree on how to get there. And I think it is appropriate at this time, as we talk about the Prime Minister-elect, that we also acknowledge Mr English and his team, who, again, whether listeners agree or disagree with them, I think you have to acknowledge that, they made a massive contribution, Mr English particularly. But I don't think, a disparate group, I think we need to just lower the tone, lower the colourful language, and look at it for what it is.
Clayton Cosgrove, former Labour Party Cabinet Minister, MP for Waimakariri, and also, of course, political advisor for the Labour Party when Mike Moore was leader of the Labour Party. Thank you so much, Clayton. If you're watching, we really appreciate your time, Clayton. If you're watching, you will have just seen the camera walking into Jacinda Ardern's office, a live shot. If you're listening, what we can show you now and what I can describe to you now is the media setting up in an office with on the wall those rather magnificent black and white photos of previous Labour Party leaders, Labour Party Prime Ministers there. They all are looking over these proceedings as Jacinda Ardern becomes the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand and the first Labour Prime Minister, of course, since 2008. Who do we have on the phone now? Do we have who have we got on the phone now? We're waiting. So we're going to take Jacinda Ardern live. We've got Bryce Edwards live on the phone now. Our political... Bryce, are you there? Dr. Bryce Edwards, political scientist and commentator and scribe. Are you there, Bryce?
Yes, I am, John.
What do you make of it all?
It's a historic occasion. This is big news. This will be news around the world. This is news for lots of different reasons. Firstly, because we have a woman Prime Minister again. Secondly, because it's the first time in, I don't know, probably about 90 years that we're going to have a Prime Minister from one of the parties that isn't the biggest party, or from the second biggest party, again, because this is, the first time under MMP or otherwise that we've had this coalition of, as some people say, losers, or coalition of the parties that campaigned in opposition against the government win. And, of course, it really is historic, because this is a change government. So after 3 terms of, the incumbents, we are seeing lots of change happening. And the way Winston Peters talked tonight was that he was trying to get a legacy of change, of being someone that's going to roll back neoliberalism, make capitalism work with a human face, I think he's talked about. So it really is, a hint of some radicalism there.
Bryce, please stay with us, but you talk about change. We've got Imre Spicer, who's Senior Market Analyst for Westpac, on the phone. Bryce, don't go. We're not ending with you, Bryce. Imre, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining us live on Checkpoint. We really appreciate it. What has the dollar done since Winston Peters made his announcement?
I'd call it a moderate downward reaction at about 0.4 of a cent since just before Peters started speaking. So it got down to about 70, 60. So it lost about a wee bit more than half a cent in the hours leading up to
yes,
the
it
press
did. It was all over the place today, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was quite a tense market. There was speculation, and Labor's chances were seen as rising through the day. Yeah. So basically, they started pricing it in. So all up, I'd say the bit before and the bit after is worth about -1 cent on the Kiwi.
So that is not a tumble, is it? There can't be colourful language attached to that, can it? That is what was the word you used, Imre? Moderate, did you say?
Yes, I'd say moderate was the right word.
Yeah, Imre Spicer, Senior Market Analyst for Westpac. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming in with that update. Bryce Edwards, back to you. Who are the winners out of this government tonight? Who are the people whose lives will be, if Labor are true to their word, if the rhetoric is meaningfully ends in action, who are the people who will do best out of this?
Well, certainly, traditionally, those that vote for left-wing governments are not just politically on the left, but lower socioeconomic voters, workers, people in the parts of New Zealand that have suffered the most from recent recessions and so forth. So people in poverty, also people in the public service that are dependent on government jobs. So health and education can expect to be better looked after. Of course, as you say, though, it really does depend on whether this government actually delivers. And, sometimes left-wing governments don't actually end up governing on behalf of those poorer constituents. I mean, the classic example is, in the 1980s with the fourth Labor government, did some very right-wing things. So I think we still have to be careful before pronouncing it as a big victory for those people. But
yes, although, gosh, did you hear Winston Peters' rhetoric around capitalism being a foe to many people rather than their friend? The idea that the National Party represented a modified status quo, that Labor were a party of change. I mean, I thought, and I've said this a couple of times, so if you've been listening throughout the night, I apologise for repeating myself, but I thought those were moments when Winston Peters sounded authentic. It sounded like that was coming from a place that mattered to him as he was saying those things.
Oh, absolutely. But more than that, I think he is genuinely tapping into what we've seen around the world of this global sort of anti-establishment zeitgeist. We've seen voter rebellions where people are talking about capitalism and talking about rolling back neoliberalism. And Winston Peters has been in sync with that over the last couple of years. And that's why I thought he was more likely to go with Labor, because he wants his legacy to be as a change maker, as someone that is, anti-establishment, someone who is with the people, not with the status quo. So, yeah, I think this is a change government, and it's going to be a fascinating ride.
Yes, it's going to be an absolutely fascinating ride. We're just, a man was just holding up a pad in Jacinda Ardern's office for the cameras to do a white balance, which is always a sign that she is not far away. Bryce, before she goes, let's talk about two personal narratives, and they are really interesting ones. Bill English took over from John Key, who was considered a politician capable of working miracles for the National Party in terms of its connectivity with the electorate. And many people felt that Bill English was not going to be able to hold National at the levels that he had inherited from John Key. In fact, he did. Now, it wasn't...
Yes.
Yeah. It wasn't enough to get National a fourth term. How will he be feeling tonight? Devastated, I suspect.
Oh, absolutely, and it hurt even more because, of course, he's repeating the past. Where in 2002 he did poorly, or wasn't in government in 2002 when National only got 21%. But yeah, you've got to feel for any politician that ends up facing things going badly. But certainly. And there'll be a lot of people on the right that will be quite bitter about this because they will see that National got, over 44%, and that they're used to, that being enough to get you into government, and it's not. So
in fact, this is the first time. This is the first time that an MMP government will have been led by a party who got fewer votes. So the Nats got 44.4, Labor got 36.9. Labor are going to be leading the government. That's the first time since MMP was introduced in 1996 that has happened. And that brings us, Bryce, to Jacinda Ardern. When she took over on the 1st of August, Labor were, in terms of polls and in terms of its ability to talk to its constituency and galvanise support and attract floating voters, a basket case. Now, they were in the early 20s, depending on what poll you're looking at, 22, 23, 24%. They finished 2 months later on 36.9. It is a remarkable story for Jacinda Ardern, isn't it?
Oh, this story will go down in certainly the political science books. It's a textbook case of how much leadership and personality, and it can actually have a big impact in politics, because not a huge amount changed under Labor apart from the person at the top. And that jolt, that leadership jolt in the polls just was extraordinary. So this is a story that will be told around the world, and it will be in the media, on all the, I don't know about front pages, but, everywhere I think people will be talking about Jacinda Ardern as the new Justin Trudeau, or, like the French Macron. This is, and because she's so young and photogenic and, obviously capable, she's going to be, a star on the international stage, I think.
So that's Bill English, who did remarkably well to retain National support at about the level he inherited, but has not won tonight. Jacinda Ardern, who hauled Labor up by its bootstraps from 23 roughly to 37 almost, and has made Labor government and is about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Let's talk, Bryce, about Winston Peters. Remember, New Zealand First were dumped from Parliament in 2008. New Zealand First, he was a Cabinet Minister under Jim Bolger in 1990. He was Deputy Prime Minister under Jim Bolger. He has been Treasurer. He has been Foreign Affairs Minister under Helen Clark. He is, whatever you think of him, and remember, they only received 7.2% of the vote, so 92.8% of the voters did not tick New Zealand First. He is a remarkable survivor, isn't he?
Oh, this is just an incredible finish for his career. I don't know how much longer he'll go, whether this will be his final term, but, maybe there'll be 2 terms. But, he will go down in history as one of the more remarkable politicians. And, everyone knows who Winston Peters is. And, he's very polarising too. He's not someone that is mild and moderate. He's someone that will, he's a populist. And that means that around the rest of the world, he's as well known as many other, sort of maybe not as much as John Key, but not far off. So, it is an incredible achievement for him.
Dr. Bryce Edwards, political scientist, thank you so much, Bryce, for your time and your expertise, not only tonight, but throughout the past few weeks, the period of the campaign and the discussions after the election. We really appreciate it, Bryce. Let's go now back to Jacinda Ardern's office, where we are waiting for the woman who is about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand to have her first media conference since Winston Peters told us that he was going with Labour. Jane Patterson, our political editor, who has done such great work over the past few weeks and months, is there, Jane, and we are waiting for her. And I know you were sitting in the front row and you were very talking on the wireless in front of all your mates.
It's all right. It's okay. We're used to it.
Yeah, you are, by golly. Jane, what's the mood there? Obviously, you haven't seen Jacinda Ardern herself, but you will have seen the staffers, the people who work in the office, the people who have been behind the scenes working so hard to get this victory for Labour. How is everyone in there?
Look, I think probably euphoric, and we'll see that reflected by Jacinda Ardern when she comes to speak to us in just a couple of minutes. It was described by one staff member. The reaction of the caucus when Winston Peters made that announcement was like they had just won the World Cup final. So people incredibly happy, overjoyed, of course, and probably a great deal of surprise because, as we heard Winston Peters in that media conference, he was announcing it to Bill English and to Jacinda Ardern at the same time as the New Zealand public.
Jane, we have shown Brett Kelly standing by to do the 8 o'clock news, which we will do at 8 o'clock because we haven't had a news. I think our last news bulletin was at 6 o'clock. Hi, Sharon. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. But, Jane, you understand that Jacinda Ardern is going to speak to you and all the other media there in about a minute and a half at 8 o'clock. Is that right?
That's right, and I've just had a notepad put in front of me saying that the World Cup final response was the staff, not the caucus. So we've had a quick on-air correction. I want to correct that immediately and through RNZ. But I'm going to surmise that the reaction of the caucus would not be too far removed from that.
And it would be strange if it wasn't, right?
That's right, absolutely, John. Now, sorry, ask your question again after that interruption.
No, my question was, you're expecting to see her in about 2 minutes. The 40th, the woman who's about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand is due to speak to you at 8 o'clock, is that right?
That's right. So we are all on standby. We're in the Labour caucus room, still in the opposition rooms, of course, in Parliament buildings. Now, we will expect to get a bit more detail from Jacinda Ardern about exactly the deal that Labour has struck with New Zealand First. And I must say, too, the Greens have convened that special convened meeting.
Right.
So the 150 delegates, national delegates from the Greens are now in that meeting. We expect that may take some time, but so I'm not sure whether Jacinda Ardern will give any details about the Greens deal before that's been ratified by that meeting. But we do know, as we talked about earlier, that they do have at least one ministerial position, but that's outside of Cabinet. Now, what we will be wanting to hear from Ms Ardern now is the number of ministerial positions that New Zealand First has secured in the deal. Mr Peters said that they hadn't decided exactly who will do which job, but also importantly, very importantly, the policy areas that they have agreed on. Now, Mr Peters alluded to some of them: Kiwi Build, cuts to immigration, monetary policy, which will come as no surprise. They were issues that were very widely traversed during the election campaign, and anyone taking a look at the policy platforms of New Zealand First and Labour would see a lot of synergy in those areas. But Ms Ardern will be giving us detail and potentially exactly what has been agreed. I'd also expect quite a big budget for regional development. Winston Peters saying that there's a deficit in the regions, that he is going to, well, I presume that he will have something to do with that portfolio, given his concentration on that during the election campaign. Whether we'll get a dollar figure or not tonight, I'm just not sure, but expect there to be a big focus of that in any policy agreement between New Zealand First and Labour.
Jane Patterson, we're going to come back to you the moment Jacinda Ardern appears, but before that, it's 8 o'clock.
RNZ News at 8 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. New Zealand has a new Prime Minister and it's Labour's Jacinda Ardern. An hour ago, the New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, announced his party will form a coalition government with the Labour Party. Labour has 46 seats, which together with the Greens 8 and New Zealand First's 9, gives them 63 seats in the House and a majority of 7 over National. In tonight's announcement in the Beehive, Mr Peters said New Zealanders had voted for change and New Zealand First has responded to that. He says the coalition negotiations had taken place against a set of internal circumstances that could not be ignored and that he believes an economic slowdown is coming. Mr Peters said the party had chosen to mitigate the anticipated slowdown and the choice of political partners has been made to advance New Zealanders' economic and social position. And Mr Peters told reporters at the Beehive that far too many New Zealanders have come to view today's capitalism not as their friend but as their foe.
That is why we believe that capitalism must regain its human face. That perception has influenced deeply New Zealand First negotiations. We had a choice whether it was either with National or Labour for a modified status quo or for change. In our negotiations, both National and Labour were presented with that opportunity. That's why, in the end, we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party.
Asked whether he was worried about Jacinda Ardern's relative lack of experience, Mr Peters said he has no doubt about Ms Ardern's ability to lead the country.
Well, we wouldn't have made the decision if we didn't. Amongst other things, she exhibited extraordinary talent in the campaign itself, from a very hopeless position to a position where they are in the office of being the next government today.
Winston Peters. The New Zealand dollar has fallen following the election of a new government. The currency shed about 0.5 cent on the news, but has since regained some lost ground. It is currently about 70.6 US cents. The dollar also fell 0.5 cent to about 89.8 Australian cents. And at Parliament tonight, the new Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is about to speak to reporters in Parliament. Reporters have gathered in the building's Labour Party rooms, and as soon as she starts speaking, we'll cross live to Parliament.
Sharon Brett-Kelly, is that the end of the news?
That looks like it is the end of the news, John.
Thank you very
much. Come out of the blue.
Oh no, just so I mean, this is Radio New Zealand in the 21st century. It's very exciting. So you said we're about to cross live to Parliament. Kelvin whacks up a shot of live, so this is very exciting. So, if you are listening, and we are delighted to still have our radio audience, of course, but you can watch us on Facebook, the RNZ website. There are lots of ways you can watch us, or you can just listen, because this is about words tonight. It is about what Winston Peters said. It is about what Jacinda Ardern is about to say. She's about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. She turned 37 in July. She became Labour Party leader on August 1st when the Labour Party was in dire straits. Now, the reason I'm just talking is that we are looking at a shot of the caucus room. So this is where Labour has its caucus meetings on Tuesday morning, the caucus room in the old Parliament buildings. Remember, that's where the opposition live and work, including also in Bowen House. But when they become Prime Minister or government, they move to the Beehive. That will happen. But at the moment, we are looking at a shot of the Labour Party caucus room, and on the wall is all the great names and great faces, the black and white photos of former Labour Party leaders. And if the photos are able to see the scenes beneath them, they will be feeling very proud and very excited tonight. Jacinda Ardern is on her way to talk to the media. Just 2.5 months after she was elected leader of Labour, she has become Prime Minister. That makes her the youngest ever Labour leader, but there's been another 37-year-old Prime Minister, a man called Edward Stafford, in 1856. Sharon Brett-Kelly. Well, no, I'm reading that. I'm reading that. But now I'd like to say I knew that. She was born in Hamilton, spent time growing up in Murupara, a small town in rural Bay of Plenty with some real issues around poverty. Her father, Ross, was a police officer in the town, went on to serve as Niue's Chief of Police and New Zealand High Commissioner to this small Pacific nation. We've got Andrew Geddes on the line. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I am, John. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you? What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think right up to the announcement, it was goodness knows where this could go. It could have gone either way. And now that we've got an announcement, it throws the election into a whole new light. I mean, if he'd announced this is, I'm going with National, we'd all be talking about how this was an election of, essentially the status quo, and how, yes, there'll be some change around the edge, but, Bill English has carried through John Key's legacy and so on and so on. But with one announcement, he's completely changed the nature of the election. I mean, now we're talking about a big change election with, revamping New Zealand's economic order and so on and so on. And so it's a pretty major thing that he's done with essentially just one word instead of another. The other thing I think we might just want to note is we technically haven't got a change of government yet, because the Greens still have to sign off on this. And until that happens, which we're assuming is pretty much a formality, because the Greens have got no real option but to do it, but until that happens, the Governor-General, who ultimately appoints the Prime Minister, can't be certain that there's a majority for anyone yet. So, yeah, I mean, you know, we can say that it will happen, but until the Greens have signed off and until we've got all three parties saying, yes, you know, we are going to be in together and we will work together, the change of government can't happen. And so we're probably still technically a day or two away from that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew Geddes, Professor of Electoral Law, you're a good man at Otago University. You're a good man to have to discuss this stuff. If you are listening, we are just waiting for Jacinda Ardern. Andrew, can we please keep you with us? When Jacinda Ardern arrives, we will go live to that. But in the meantime, and you're absolutely right, I mean, there is no formal coalition. There will not be a trip to the Governor-General's yet by Jacinda Ardern, but it is a formality, that stuff, isn't it?
You have to say pretty much it is. I mean, you know, if the Greens were to turn around and say, no, we're not doing this, well, you know, they can't really, can they? I mean, they have to take whatever they're given. Then once all that stuff's signed off and the Governor-General can look at it and see that, yes, there's a clear and obvious majority in the House, then the formal process of government change can take place.
Yes. Andrew, this is the first time since MMP became our electoral system in 1996 that the party with the fewer votes hasn't led the government as the result of the coalition negotiations. Sorry, the most votes. So National got 44.4, Labor got 36.9. Some people are going to be outraged by this and say, hey, this isn't fair. The National Party did 8 points better than Labor. But MMP advocates, proportional representation advocates, this was precisely the kind of coalition building that they were selling with the system back in 1993 when we had that referendum, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people will look at it and say, well, how come the biggest guys don't get to rule? And the answer to that is because that's never been the way our system has set up. Our system's always been, to govern the country, you must have a majority in the House of Representatives. And 44, 45% it's a remarkable achievement. I mean, let's not get it wrong. National did very well to get that much, but it's not enough. It's like if the All Blacks scored 4 converted tries in the game, and everyone goes, well, they must win. They've scored 4 converted tries. But if the opposition scores more points, they win.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's what's happened here. That's, you know, the three parties together, the Greens, New Zealand First, Labor, they have a majority in the House of Representatives, and that allows them to govern. And if Winston Peters believes that Labor can provide a better future for New Zealand, he was elected to make that decision. You know, 180,000 people voted for him and gave him the right to make that, you know, to think that. That's the majority and that governs. And, you know, that's essentially what democracy is about. Majorities rule, not biggest rule.
I just saw Annette King walk through shot, Andrew, as you talk to us. She has been a wise counsel to Jacinda Ardern behind the scenes. Jacinda Ardern at 37, lots of people talking early on about her experience, but actually she transformed the Labor Party, didn't she? It was, in fact, her sense of possibility, her sense of being connected in different ways to a different part of the electorate that transformed a metamorphosis for Labor. Andrew, she is walking down the hallway now. Andrew Geddes, Professor of Electoral Law at Otago University. Thank you so much for being with us, Andrew. We're really grateful. Jacinda Ardern, who, unless, as Andrew says, something quite extraordinary happens, is about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand, has just arrived in the Labor Party caucus room to speak.
Welcome and thank you for all your patience. I want it to be noted I've only left you here for 10 minutes though. I want to start by saying that it is an absolute honour and a privilege to have the ability, as the leader of the New Zealand Labour Party, to form a government for all New Zealanders. I also want to say that this has been a campaign that has been robust and rigorous. And I want to thank Bill English for the role that he has played in that campaign, but also as Prime Minister and as serving in the past as New Zealand's Finance Minister. Mr English has already called me this evening and acknowledged that for the National Party, negotiations have now concluded. I personally have always believed that members of Parliament come to this place in order to do good and to serve their country as best as they can. Mr English is an absolute example of that. and I want to acknowledge it. These negotiations have been robust, but there has been more that has united the parties than has divided. Labor has always believed that government should be a partner in ensuring an economy that works and delivers for all New Zealanders. We also believe in a government that looks after its environment and that ultimately looks after its people. And I believe that Labor has found true allies in Parliament to deliver on that. I want to thank New Zealand First for the decision that they have made. I know it has been significant and difficult. I want to thank them for the time and consideration they put into the negotiations, and I can confirm that they were indeed dominated by a discussion around policy and ensuring that consensus existed on the issues that were of the greatest importance to each of us. They formed a solid foundation on which we will now build a coalition government. I also, in the same vein, want to thank and acknowledge the New Zealand Green Party. We've also engaged in a robust policy negotiation with them also. They have engaged us on areas of consensus and on areas where we have taken different views. I acknowledge that they are now undertaking a process with their party, which I respect, and we will await the outcome of that to confirm that together we will indeed have successfully changed the government. It is my intention that over the next 24 hours we will conclude the final remaining areas of our agreement that need to be completed for both respective parties. Also, tomorrow afternoon, the New Zealand Labour Party will hold a caucus that will enable us to carry out an election for cabinet positions for Labour. Early next week, we will be in a position to sign and release the agreements that the New Zealand Labour Party has negotiated both with New Zealand First and with the Green Party. Later in the week, we will confirm and release ministerial portfolios more broadly, and a swearing-in ceremony will take place. I want to conclude again by saying I feel extraordinarily honoured and privileged to be in the position to form a government with Labor at the lead. I want to thank all those who gave Labor support throughout the election and through this period of negotiation. We campaigned hard on issues that we believe strongly on, and now we take very seriously the responsibility that we have to deliver on them.
How many portfolios have you given New Zealand First and in particular Winston Peters?
New Zealand First will hold 4 cabinet positions. They will also have 1 parliamentary undersecretary.
What about Winston Peters? What position have you given him? Is he Deputy Prime Minister?
Mr Peters has been offered the role. As you've heard earlier tonight, he is still considering whether or not he will take that role.
What about the Greens? What roles do they have?
As I've said, ministerial portfolios will be released in due course. I want to make sure I honour the process that the Green Party is going through at the moment. They're discussing their agreement, so I'll leave it to James Shaw to announce the outcome of that and the nature of some elements of that agreement.
Can you confirm that they will have ministers?
I can confirm they will have ministerial portfolios.
Will the New Zealand Green Party be inside the coalition?
I want to honour the process the Greens are going through. We will, of course, be releasing those agreements in due course, but I don't want to undermine the process the Greens are currently going through. But I can confirm they have been offered ministerial portfolios.
That they are in a confidence and supply agreement as opposed to a coalition.
Again, I do want to make sure that the Green Party has the ability to announce the agreement that they have, but again, I'm confirming they have ministerial portfolios.
Are you satisfied that the Greens are signing up to that?
Oh, I'm satisfied that throughout this campaign, the Greens' strong message was that they wanted to change the government. We are now in the position to do that. Of course, I respect the process they're undertaking, but my expectation is that we are together changing the government. Alex, sorry.
Mr. Peter said there might also be other portfolios on the table that you might be able to take up. Can you let us know what they are?
Oh, certainly we've had a conversation and we are very close to finalising those ministerial portfolios. But again, I want to make sure that we're in the position to complete those conversations over the next 24 hours. Certainly there's a strong interest from New Zealand First in the area of ensuring that our regions are well cared for, are well supported, have the jobs and infrastructure that they deserve. It's a value that Labor shares, but again, we'll be confirming those portfolios in due course.
Winston Peters didn't contact you before making his announcement. Would you have liked him to?
Oh, I enjoyed the theatre of being with everyone at the same time as I joined with New Zealand as we collectively learnt the information together.
How was your reaction?
Again, I felt an overwhelming sense of being incredibly honoured, privileged and humbled.
Do you think you could learn from...
I've never won a World Cup, so I wouldn't know.
Do you think you can learn from Winston Peters? He's a very experienced politician as opposed to you.
My view is that we'll have a partnership, that we'll continue to learn from one another.
Can you outline the policy priorities? Sorry, Peter. Can you outline the policy priorities that are going to feature in your agreement with New Zealand First and the Greens as, I suppose, a representation of your government?
Yeah, look, the areas that all parties campaigned on will feature heavily in their respective agreements. And it was obvious at the conclusion of the campaign, those areas where we had common ground, an economy that delivers for all New Zealanders, an environment that we are protecting and preserving, making sure that all New Zealanders have access to the services they need. For each respective party, there's a different focus, a different set of priorities, and you'll see those reflected in the agreements that we produce.
And you're happy you can balance the interests of New Zealand First and the Greens, which, you know, sometimes may be in opposition?
Absolutely. Through the negotiation process, it's become even more apparent to me that there is an extraordinary amount of common ground between us on what we wish to deliver for all New Zealanders.
Winston Peters has said that the Kiwi Bill policy is going ahead. Is that going to go ahead in the full scale, 100,000 homes over 10 years?
What will have been clear through the campaign is that we all agreed that there is a housing crisis. We all agreed there was a role for the state to play, and we all agree we need to build that scale of houses. So yes, that is what we remain committed to.
Do you make any concessions?
Oh, certainly in any negotiation, concessions are made. My role was to ensure that I only made concessions in areas that the New Zealand Labour Party would feel comfortable with and what were in line with our values and principles. What I needed to hold on to as leader was making sure that in every case we were holding on to our ultimate goals. You'll see when those agreements are released how we've managed to do that.
You've actually got to know when...
Sorry, Barry.
And does the Green Party deserve to know that before they make their decisions?
Again, we had a robust conversation about policy direction. We all agreed, every single party agreed, that in New Zealand our rivers are dying. We all agreed that we needed to take action. The methodology we wanted to use differed in some areas, but you'll see from the policies, the agreements that we release and the policies within them, that we've found a path forward collectively. Sorry.
How will you approach your relationship with Australia given George Bishop's concerns around working with the Labour?
My intention is to make a trip to Australia as soon as I am able.
Does the government that you intend to leave
during the course of
so Barry's just the loudest, so I'm just going to...
You've actually got to know Winston Peters during the course of this. You didn't really know him before that. What do you like about him?
Oh, I've always had respect for Mr Peters as a politician, and throughout this process I've been able to see and have confirmed that he has been absolutely focused on the issues he's campaigned on. The vast majority of these negotiations have been about the things he wants to deliver for New Zealanders. I absolutely respect that. We've found a pathway forward to do that, and I have no doubt that we will work together in a respectful relationship and with the goal of delivering for all New Zealanders.
Does this government capitalism have become foe rather than friend of New Zealanders? Do you agree with that, and what sort of capitalism do you see under it?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that it's not delivering for the people of New Zealand, that we need to make sure that we're an active government working alongside people to ensure that they are having all of their needs met. We need to make sure they can access government services when they need them, that they are supported to find work, and that we are being active ensuring that we have greater job creation in this country, that we don't just simply allow New Zealand's economy to be reliant on a housing market and simple population growth. We're ambitious that our economy can do better.
And you also said that monetary policy will be reformed, but that we haven't secured a full hog Singapore-style model. So are we just going to be seeing really your policy there?
Certainly there was a long conversation about what we wanted to achieve together in that area. You'll know that we had a policy that we went to the election on, but I'll leave it to the time that we release the agreements to see the final outcome of those conversations.
What will the government's policy, what will the new government led by you's policy be on the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Do you still want to sign the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
It'll be the same as what we campaigned on.
Will you be travelling to the APEC meeting?
That's currently my intention.
I know it's still early days yet, but have you had any contact from other world leaders congratulating you yet?
I've unfortunately didn't have the ability to take a call from Bill Shorten. And you'll forgive me for not having looked at my phone for a wee while.
How much have we seen net migration drop under a Labour New Zealand First government?
You'll already be familiar with our policy, and that's what we're sticking with.
Did any of your 100 days plans get severely cut or become a problem in negotiations?
You'll see from the final release of our agreements where there has been a different view taken from other parties, but by and large, I'm very comfortable that we have focused on the end outcomes that Labour has always wanted to achieve, be it clean waterways, be it more housing, be it focusing on issues like child poverty. On each of the principles we've campaigned on, we've stuck to it.
Will your government be selling? Will your government stop the sale of farmland to foreign owners?
We've had a policy for some time that when it comes to critical infrastructure, when it comes to existing housing, that we needed to take a much more proactive effort to curb foreign ownership, and that remains the case.
Does that include farms? Does that include farms?
We've always had a policy which means that if it's a significant asset over a particular size, that yes, that should be curtailed.
At the TPP talks at APEC, are you willing to walk away from the TPP altogether if you don't get the housing ban and the changes to ISDS?
That has not been demonstrated as necessary at this time. We're in a period of renegotiation for that agreement, and we'll be using that period of renegotiation to deliver an outcome that will ensure that New Zealanders are looked after in that agreement. At the moment, the government made no effort to negotiate an agreement that allowed New Zealanders to ensure that they can protect the asset that they're being unable to attain, which is housing.
But you will
yes,
not sign...
Henry.
How many portfolios have you got for the Green Party? Any undersecretaries here as well?
We have tried to ensure that we have been as proportional as possible in the way that we have treated ministerial portfolios. But again, I don't want to undermine the process that the Green Party is currently undertaking. I imagine that they'll be keen and eager to release that in due course.
Will those Green ministries be assigned cabinet alongside New Zealand?
Again, as I've already said, the nature of the agreement is the question that's being asked. I want to make sure that the Green Party have the opportunity to take that agreement to the SGM, which is currently underway.
Can you tell us how quickly you expect to have a new monetary policy in place? Maybe I'll ask you, Mr. Robertson.
Oh, I'm behind you. Look, no, that's something we'll look at in over the coming weeks. We campaigned with the specific monetary policy changes. We've obviously had discussions about those during the negotiations. We'll get underway as soon as we possibly can.
Follow up to that. Follow up to that. You've got a monetary policy statement from the Reserve Bank on the 9th of November. Is it going to be before that or after?
We'll just do it as soon as we can.
Do you want to see the
I imagine it'll take a bit more time than that, Rob.
Do you want to see the Reserve Bank appoint the new governor before you made the monetary policy changes?
My understanding is some of that work is already underway.
Will Pike River be re-entered as a matter of expeditiously?
You'll be aware that Pike River and a manned re-entry was a priority for the Green Party, for the Labour Party and the New Zealand First Party. So absolutely.
As Prime Minister, you're obviously going to be living in a goldfish bowl. How are you going to find the lack of privacy?
I'm from Morrinsville. There's no chance that I will ever live in a goldfish bowl. I expect that my family, my friends, My colleagues in the New Zealand Labour Party, indeed our members and our supporters, will continually keep me grounded and remind me why it is I first ran for politics, and why it is that they elected me to be Prime Minister.
Did you stay within the budget responsibility rules that you set for yourself and in agreement with the Greens and the negotiations you struck?
Again, we're currently finalising the final details of those agreements, but we've certainly set ourselves some high expectations in that regard.
You haven't finalised it yet?
The agreements have not been finalised, but certainly the budget responsibility rules have been top of our mind in these negotiations.
Does the new government have to renegotiate the free trade agreements to incorporate changes on foreign ownership?
No, our understanding is that where we currently are with most of those agreements, that those shouldn't undermine those. We have been explicit that when it comes to the Korea Free Trade Agreement, yes, there is an element of renegotiation that will be required in order to fulfil our policy of making sure that we ban foreign ownership of existing homes in New Zealand. So that is a period of a bit of renegotiation that we will need to undertake.
Are you also agreeing to ban foreign buying of land, particularly farmland?
Again, we have a set of criteria that relates to where we consider that to be critical infrastructure.
Is your intention that the foreign buyers ban is introduced to the Parliament within the first 100 days of the government?
The foreign buyer ban on residential housing. On that regard, we always said that we would prioritise putting in place that ban on foreign ownership of existing houses, and that has not changed.
Might be very jittery about the Labour New Zealand First Greens government.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I would say that Labour consistently delivered a strong and robust economic outlook for New Zealand. We delivered 9 budget surpluses. We're the strongest continuous economic growth since World War II. We ensured that at all times we were fiscally prudent and we were strong economic managers. We did that whilst in a coalition, whilst in a confidence and supply agreement with New Zealand First too. That will continue.
Will there be moves to move that? Will there be moves to move that Auckland Port North? Will there be an inquiry?
We've always said that we believe there is room to look at opportunities outside of the existing site for Auckland's port. We've always maintained that as a Labour Party, and we continue to maintain that.
Kevin Davis, you saved the money.
Kevin, do you feel that it's an injustice that the largest party is not part of the government?
I would say that what has now been formed on the basis of the majority of New Zealand's votes.
Kevin Davis, Winston Peters said that the Māori seats referendum won't be happening. That's obviously very pleasing for you.
Very happy. Ai, tino hari koa kua pūmautia kua u ngā tūru Māori.
Good, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Jacinda Ardern, who, unless something quite extraordinary, unexpected and bizarre happens, is about to become the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Winston Peters announcing that he will go with Labour. The Greens are still meeting and they are having a discussion about what they are going to do. But what we know is that New Zealand First have been offered or are being offered 4 cabinet positions and 1 undersecretary position, that Winston Peters, unless for reasons that we can't even begin to imagine, he turns down the offer, he will also become Deputy Prime Minister, meaning that Kelvin Davis, who was Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, will not be Deputy Prime Minister. The Greens have been offered ministerial portfolios, plural. Lots of use of the word portfolios with an S on the end. Some confusion, no clarity whatsoever about whether they are inside cabinet or outside cabinet, but they have been offered portfolios, plural. New Zealand First been offered 4 and 1 cabinet under-secretary position. Winston Peters will be Deputy Prime Minister. Jacinda Ardern will be New Zealand's 40th Prime Minister. And we are about to have a Labour, New Zealand First and Green coalition government. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. We really appreciate your company since Checkpoint came on air at 5 o'clock. It has been an extraordinary effort by a fantastic team. We might take a shot of them in the studio. There's Catherine Wallbridge, our executive producer, Blair and Rangi, who've been running the desk and doing a stunning job, and Bridget Burke, who's been lining people up to talk to us as we've kept going. Sean, our tech man in the back of shot there, on behalf of all of us and our brilliant gallery team who have done such great work over the past few weeks. Thank you for being with us. Sharon has the headlines, and then Brian will resume normal programming.
Kia ora, John. Good evening. New Zealand has a new Prime Minister, and it's Labour's Jacinda Ardern. An hour and a half ago, the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters announced his party will form a coalition government with the Labour Party. In tonight's announcement in the Beehive, Mr Peters said New Zealanders had voted for change, and New Zealand First has responded to that. Mr Peters told reporters the coalition negotiations had taken place against a set of internal circumstances that could not be ignored, and that he believes an economic slowdown is coming. He said far too many New Zealanders have come to view today's capitalism not as their friend but as their foe, and they are not wrong. And the country's new Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has been speaking to reporters in the Labour Party rooms at Parliament. She started her speech by saying she felt incredibly honoured to have the job of leading the country, and she also thanked National Party leader Bill English for his work as former Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Ms Ardern also thanked New Zealand First for their decision to go with Labour. Meanwhile, the New Zealand dollar has fallen following the election of the new government. The currency shed about 0.5 cent on the news, but has since regained some lost ground. It is currently about 70.6 US cents. And that's the news.
You're tuned tonight, it's an hour